Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Scion Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku had injury transfer quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku kept his head down low as he made his way through the massive halls of UA, trying to keep the number of eyes on him to a minimum. His tie hung tightly around his neck like a noose, making him pull at it periodically in an attempt to loosen it. He had never been good at tying those DMN things. He could still hardly believe that he was actually here. Going to high school at the same place that had raised Endeavor, Best Jeanist, and All Might. The very same. Somehow this weak, useless, quirkless. Izuku shook his head slightly, trying to banish those thoughts. He really needed to stop doing that. Let's see, he began, murmuring to himself quietly, 1B? 1B. 1B. Izuku stared up at the massive door to his new homeroom with no small amount of trepidation. Why was it so big, already fearing the worst? He really hoped Bakugou and that mean kid with the glasses weren't in his homeroom. He'd rather not be ostracized before the first bell even rang. Knowing his luck, he wouldn't have much say in the matter. Izuku shook his head again. Zoning out, just like his muttering, was always a problem for him, even more so since his days at Aldera. At least when he muttered he could bite his lips and keep himself from talking. His mind was much harder to wrangle than that. Izuku took a deep breath, and steeled himself for what was to come. He gripped the door, quivering slightly, and slid it open. The room was, surprisingly normal, all things considered. It was very spacious, which Izuku expected given how big the door alone was, and the far wall was pretty much all window, but that was as far as the spectacle went. Izuku could appreciate that. As he quietly walked in, a few heads turned towards him, but nobody said anything. He took a quick glance at the faces, and let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding in when he realized he couldn't recognize anyone. That meant no glasses guy, and no Bakugou. Thank God. On the chalkboard the phrase, "Pick any seat," was scrawled out in big, white letters, so Izuku helped himself to the seat furthest in the back, closest to the wall. Ideally, he would have taken the seat on the far wall, but something about that wall composed of one big window just rubbed him the wrong way. He wasn't too good with heights anymore, and they were pretty high up. It would be very distracting for him, at the very least. Izuku kept to himself, eyes trained squarely on his desk as the rest of the room slowly filled with students. Every time the door opened, he took a peek at the face that entered, the fear of Bakugou's snarling visage entering the room omnipresent, but each and every time he was blessed with a complete stranger instead. A girl with silver hair, a short, stout boy, a boy with a speech bubble for a head. Izuku didn't care who it was, anyone would be better than Bakugou. There wasn't much fanfare as everyone made themselves comfortable in the room. There wasn't much talking, although Izuku could hear a group of boys getting along rather well somewhere on the other side of the room, and Izuku couldn't blame them. It was their first day of UA's hero course, who wouldn't be nervous? The only interaction Izuku had with one of his classmates was with a boy who was pitch black, with pale white hair. When he had entered the classroom he had immediately made his way to the desk Izuku was in, only to freeze when he had realized it was already occupied. He stared at Izuku, a clear frown on his face, but before Izuku could muster up the courage to offer up his seat the boy sighed and took the desk in front of him. Izuku just went back to staring quietly at his desk, not wanting to draw any more ire from the boy than he already had. Plus, trying to keep as still as a statue helped him to quell the slight shaking that had begun to rack him. Right before the bell was set to ring, their teacher walked through the door, and it was a shock to Izuku, Vlad King, the blood hero. He had so much merch of him. Izuku had to bite his bottom lip to keep from going on a muttering spree, and even then it was close. He was even in his hero costume. It was almost enough to make a hero nerd like Izuku faint. Even though the man had pretty much every student's attention the moment he walked it, thanks to both his hulking figure and his blood red and silver costume making him stick out like a sore thumb, he cleared his throat in an attempt to fully quiet everyone down. It worked. "Good morning, everyone," Vlad King rumbled, his deep voice echoing throughout the room easily, "and welcome to UA. My name is Kensekijiro, and I am your homeroom teacher for this year. You may call me Ken-sensei or Vlad King-sensei, as that is my hero name." He paused for a moment, allowing his eyes to roll over the 20 students sitting in front of him. Izuku hoped he imagined the man's eyes lingering on him for a split second longer than everybody else. Being a hero is no easy task, he began solemnly, causing most of the students' backs to go ramrod straight, and your time at this institution will not be either. It will be rigorous, it will be demanding. Just because you pass the entrance exams does not mean you are safe. I am not an easy teacher, and I will not allow you to skid by in this class and end up being killed in the field because of it. His eyes softened at that line, allowing everyone to truly grasp what he was saying. With that being said, I'd like to think I am a fair teacher. I was in your shoes once, even if it was hundreds of years ago. A few snickers drifted up from the class at the line, and Vlad King allowed himself to smirk. I will do my best to ensure each and every one of you make it to graduation. I am here for all of you. Please do come to me if you have any questions about anything at any point in the year, or if you need anything from me, or if you just need to talk to someone. Vlad King clasped his hands together. Now, we have a few minutes until orientation, so? As lame as it is, I'd like it if we went around the room and all introduced ourselves. A groan rose up from most of the room, causing Vlad King to sigh. I know, he sighed, but it's the easiest way for you all to meet each other. You will be classmates with each other for the next 3 years, might as well get started now. You don't have to say anything specific, alright? Just your name and anything else you want to add will suffice. He took a glance around the room, before his eyes landed on the desk closest to the door. Kendo-san, why don't we start with you? The girl, Kendo, he supposed, shrugged before standing up and offering everyone a bright smile and wave. She had medium-length orange hair done up into a ponytail and bright teal eyes, and was admittedly rather pretty. Izuku knew that meant nothing. He knew better than anyone that looks could be deceiving. Hello everyone, she greeted politely, I'm Kendo Itsuka, it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I'm a big fan of martial arts, and my family owns a dojo. I'm excited to spend the next few years with you all. She sat down after that, Vlad King nodding at her in appreciation. They went row by row, meaning there was plenty of time before Izuku was called. There were a few notable standouts, like Hananuki, Tsunatori, and Bondo. His head was a glue dispenser. So cool, but overall most of the class had similarly concise introductions. Some of them had such interesting quirks as well. Not everyone deigned to share what their quirk was, but Izuku was struggling to contain his excitement regardless. It was almost a game to him, trying to figure out what their quirks were based on personality and appearance alone. Did Shiizaki's quirk have to do with her thorny hair? Was Kurwaro's black skin a byproduct of his quirk in the sense that it dyed his skin, or was it from spending so much time in shadow? Izuku took a breath. Almost. He had to keep reminding himself that it wouldn't be very smart of him to out himself as a nerdy freak before he had even introduced himself. And as Kaibara sat down, suddenly all eyes were on Izuku. Sheet. Izuku hoped nobody had a quirk that could smell fear. Hi, he managed, trying not to let his stutter affect him. I'm Midoriya Izuku, and I'm a big fan of heroes. Please take care of me. Someone coughed, or at least pretended to, because Izuku was positive he heard a boring in there. Oh god, people were starting to snicker. Izuku's face burned scarlet as he sat down, embarrassment cranked up to 10. Why did he even bother? He winced as the boy to his left, Kamakiri, got up and introduced himself in a way so brash it almost reminded him of Bakugou. He really was screwed, wasn't he? Izuku didn't pay too much attention to the final few people giving out introductions, more focused on making himself seem as small as possible. Maybe then he could be forgotten, and allowed to fly under the radar for the next 3 years. It would certainly be better than being known as a stuttering loser. Somehow, though, he doubted it. Alright, Vlad King said once everyone had finished, that's good enough for now, but it's time for us to get a move on. Orientation is in a few minutes, as well as the entrance ceremony, and as bland as they might be, they're important. With that, everyone filed out behind Vlad King, Izuku gladly taking a spot in the back of the group. The less eyes on him, the better. Orientation wasn't that bad. It mainly consisted of Principal Nizu half explaining, half humbly bragging about UA and its facilities and achievements. It was pretty cool how a bunch of the staff like Recovery Girl and Hound Dog had speeches to give as well. Izuku loved seeing so many heroes in one place. He had half a mind to pull out a notebook and start asking for autographs. The only thing that seemed to be awry was that there was a big empty space in the bleachers next to 1B, and based on the tired sigh Vlad King Sensei had given when he saw it, this was a regular occurrence. Nizu had been subtle about it, but Izuku was pretty sure he saw the principal's eyes flick over there a few times as well. He wondered if the all-too-familiar explosion that went off outside halfway through the principal's speech had anything to do with it. Izuku sat down at the first empty table he could find in the cafeteria, far away from where most of the other students had settled. There were plenty of tables, so it wasn't too far-fetched to say that nobody would. Hiya. Can I sit here? Izuku jumped in his seat, eyes darting up to see one of his classmates? If he remembered correctly, and he certainly did, Fukudashi was his name. He certainly wasn't going to forget a face, or lack thereof, considering his head was a speech bubble, like that. Sure, Izuku responded quietly, Fukudashi-san, right? Yep. He responded proudly, and you're Midoriya, yeah? Izuku just nodded silently as Fukudashi unceremoniously plopped his stuff down into an empty seat and took one for himself, still unsure of why anyone would want to sit with him. Was he really going to be punked on the first day? Fukudashi bobbed his head, something Izuku could only distinguish because his shoulders dipped as well. Cool, nice to meet ya. Likewise. Fukudashi hummed to himself as Izuku started to eat, causing the green-haired teen to look at him in confusion. Fukudashi-san, he started, nearly losing his nerve once he turned towards him, why don't you have any food? Fukudashi groaned, and Izuku immediately ready to apologize, putting his hands up in surrender, but the other boy beat him to it. Dude, it's awful. He whined, the image of a sweat drop appearing in the top corner of his speech bubble. I don't have a mouth, so I can't eat normally, but I still need food. It's a whole process, so I just do it at home, you know. Izuku did not, in fact, know, but he nodded along anyways. Anyways, Fukudashi prattled, what did you think of the classes today? It's so cool that we get to be taught by pros, right? Izuku couldn't help but brighten up a tad at the mention of their classes. After orientation they had a short PRD with all of their teachers, with the exception of their foundational hero studies teacher, back in their classroom, and it was like heaven for him. Why yeah, Izuku agreed, it's one thing to listen to present Mick's radio show, but to actually see him in person and have him teach us is something else entirely. I know, right? Present Mike is one of my favorite heroes. His quirk is just like mine. If there was a way to pique Izuku's interest, that was it? Really? Izuku's eyes lit up like tiny stars as he leaned forward, smiling wide. What's your quirk? Fukudashi laughed. DMN, so you do have a personality. Here I was, thinking you were just a mopey loner, and the moment we start talking quirks you go crazy. Izuku froze. He screwed up again, didn't he? Anyways, my quirk is called comic, Fukudashi explained, unperturbed by Izuku's excitement. Aside from making my head well, whatever this is, it lets me make onomatopoeia real. Here, watch. Fukudashi made a weird noise, almost like he was trying to impersonate a spring or a trampoline. To Izuku's complete shock, the boing sound that Fukudashi made actually appeared on his speech bubble in kanji form, and floated off his face. He then placed the kanji on the table, pulled out a pencil from his bag, and dropped it on the word. It bounced off, flying right back into Fukudashi's hand. Izuku was in awe. That's so cool. Izuku whisper shouted, can you make up new onomatopoeia, or are you constricted to a certain list of sounds? What decides how powerful the onomatopoeia you create is? If you dash. Whoa, is your quirk speed talking or something? Fukudashi joked, I can barely tell what you're saying. Izuku immediately clamped his mouth shut, face burning red once again as he embarrassed himself for the second time in as many minutes in front of his new classmate. Sorry. Izuku muttered, dejectedly looking down at his lap. Geez, dude, no need to be so nervous. Fukudashi said, putting his hands up placatingly. I'm only kidding, you know. Why yeah, sorry, Izuku apologized again, trying to think of a way to explain his skittishness. It's just that, it's kinda nerve-wracking actually being at UA, you know? Fukudashi nodded empathetically. I hear ya, going here is like a dream come true. Literally. I was so excited to come here that I almost missed my morning train because I couldn't fall asleep. That got Izuku to smile. But also to think a bit, if Fukudashi needed sleep, did he dream? Did he have a brain in the same way Izuku had? How was he able to see? How? Anyways, Fukudashi continued, I told you about my quirk, what's yours? Does it have anything to do with the fact that your hair is green? Izuku rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. You'd think that, but no, he muttered, before straightening up a bit, my quirk is nothing special. It's dash. Excuse me. Izuku blinked in surprise at a new voice, turning his head to see another one of his new classmates. The boy was practically a giant in comparison to Izuku and Fukudashi, but what made him stick out even further was his yellow skin and peculiar head that apparently could dispense glue. Izuku definitely remembered his name. Bondo was too unique to forget. What's up, big guy? Fukudashi asked cheerfully. Would it be alright if I sat with you? Bondo asked simply. It was subtle, but when he squinted Izuku could see the arms that held Bondo's lunch tray shaking ever so slightly. He doubted Fukudashi noticed. His speech bubble grew a big emoticon as if it was a face. Sure. Fukudashi said, speaking for Izuku as well, we don't mind. Izuku did not, in fact, mind, but even if he did he doubted he would be able to say anything. His mind was busy racing a mile a minute. People, his classmates, wanted to sit with him. They willingly chose to interact with him, instead of avoiding him, or worse, bullying him. It was almost too good to be true. Bando nodded gratefully, taking one of the seats next to Fukudashi for himself as he began to poke at his food. Say, do you guys remember if Kan-sensei said who our foundational hero studies teacher is? Fukudashi asked. I kinda spaced out during that whole teacher introduction thing. Izuku blinked. It was only like 20 minutes per class, at most. Fukudashi shrugged. I get bored easily. Besides, all any of them were doing was introducing themselves and explaining the syllabus. I don't need to pay attention to all of that. Izuku and Bando shuddered in unison. Midnight Sensei had a lot of fun teasing the class during her brief PRD with 1B. If he had a mirror, Izuku was sure he would have looked like a strawberry. Judging by the semi-predatory look in Midnight Sensei's eyes, there was a lot more where that came from. Well, Kan-sensei didn't say, but, Bando paused, I heard a rumor that All Might was going to be teaching at UA. Izuku choked on his spit. All Might? Izuku managed, barely overcoming the shock his system was going through. He's going to be teaching here. Bando shrugged. Maybe. It's only a rumor. Personally, I can't imagine the #1 hero being a teacher. All Might teaching here would be so cool. Fukudashi cheered, he'd automatically be one of my top 3 teachers here. Izuku gasped as if Fukudashi had just insulted his lineage. Just top 3? He said, aghast, it's All Might. The #1 hero. The symbol of peace. Yeah, but I already told you that Present Mike is one of my favorites, Fukudashi countered, plus, Midnight is, like, super hot. All Might's great and all, but I know who I'd rather spend detention with. Izuku vehemently disagreed with just about everything Fukudashi said, but he wasn't going to fight a losing battle. Especially against his new classmate? Friend? Were the 3 of them friends? It had been so long since he had friends, he didn't know what constituted a friendship anymore. He really hoped they wanted to be friends. They were so nice to him. All Might would be awesome, Bando agreed, but I think it would be amazing if the wild pussycats were our teachers, even if it's unlikely. Who? Fukudashi asked, a question mark appearing in his speech bubble. Oh. Do you mean that group of 3 girls and the dude that all wear matching costumes? Bando nodded in affirmation. Yeah, them. They mostly specialize in team rescue training, but are each individually gifted and are known to be able to fight villains as well. I think we could learn a lot from them. Oh, so it's not because the blonde one is hot? Fukudashi asked innocently. Bando made a strange sound that sounded like a cross between a wheeze and the toll of a bell, before trying, and failing, to formulate a defense against Fukudashi's allegations. Fukudashi, for his part, began to cackle hysterically. Izuku hid a smile behind his hands as he watched them interact. He really hoped they wanted to be friends. Okay, maybe they didn't. Izuku had only gotten up for a moment to throw his waist away, the final bell for the day ringing throughout the cafeteria, and by the time he had gotten back Fukudashi and Bando were gone. He tried to look for them, but it was impossible to pick out anybody from the mass of students rushing for the exit. Of course. Why was Izuku surprised? As he stepped outside, he let out a shuddering sigh, the wetness in his eyes all too familiar. This was how it always was, and how it always would be. He would always be the same old Deku. Useless, friendless, worthless. Yo, Midoriya-kun. Over here. Izuku was shaken out of his self-loathing thoughts with a JRK, looking up to see Fukudashi and Bando waving him over to their little group. We were gonna wait for you in there. Fukudashi jerked a finger back towards the school, but it was getting pretty cramped, so we decided to just wait out here. Bando nodded. Apologies for not letting you know, Midoriya-san. It's fine, Izuku breathed out, simultaneously shocked and relieved beyond measure. Why, you don't need to apologize. Yeah. Fukudashi agreed, so can we leave now? I heard that the principal sends drones after students who stay on campus after school ends. How could that be true? Bando questioned. UA offers a variety of extracurricular activities to its students, especially those in the hero course. Fukudashi shrugged. You know. Heard it from a 3rd year. But did you hear the principal earlier? He sounded super smart, wouldn't shock me if he had some secret robot security force. If Bando had eyes, Izuku was sure he would have rolled them. I don't think they could do that to high schoolers even if they wanted to, Fukudashi-san. You're just no fun. A tongue appeared on Fukudashi's speech bubble, as though he were blowing a raspberry at Bando. Back me up here, Midoriya. Izuku just laughed a bit, the 3 of them making their way to the train station together as Fukudashi tried in vain to convince them of Nizu's mad schemes. It was nice. Maybe UA really would be different. Maybe he could be a hero. Yo, Midoriya-kun. Fukudashi called, over here. Izuku jerked in surprise as he entered the classroom, still not really used to being paid much mind by his peers. At least, not in a positive way. Hello, Fukudashi-san, Bando-san, Izuku greeted as he made his way over to his friends, who were crowded around Fukudashi's desk along with another of their classmates, Nairenjiki, if Izuku remembered right. We need you to settle a debate for us, Midoriya-kun. Fukudashi explained, you see, Nairenjiki-kun here thinks that Hawks would beat Endeavor in a one-on-one fight, but me and Bando-kun think Endeavor would win. Izuku blinked. Based on your interest in quirks, as well as your vast knowledge of heroes, Bando continued, we thought it would be smartest to consult you on your opinion in this matter. Izuku blushed. All he had done yesterday was ask about Fukudashi and Bando's quirks some more as they made their way to the train station yesterday. And maybe ask a few extra questions. And maybe go on a mumble rant about heroes with similar quirks they could learn from. And maybe. Yeah, he brought this on himself. At least they weren't openly mocking him for his interests, like everyone at Aldra used to. That was a welcome surprise. Well, Izuku responded quietly, Hawks would win. Fukudashi gasped dramatically. No, Midoriya-kun. You're supposed to be on our side. Izuku flinched slightly, practically unnoticeable to the eyes of the guys around him. Did he mess up? Sorry, Fukudashi-san, he tried, eyes darting down, no, Hawks would win. Bando hummed. Why do you think so, Midoriya-kun? Endeavor is incredibly smart, and has an incredible quirk. Hellflame would burn through Hawks's feathers easily. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Yeah, that's true, he began, forcing an awkward laugh, but Hawks is fast. Really fast. And the control he has over his feathers is absolute. That, combined with Hellflame's drawback of not making Endeavor immune to the heat it creates means the fight would likely devolve into a hit-and-run style battle where Hawks repeatedly forces Endeavor to activate his quirk in order to avoid taking critical damage from Hawks, while Endeavor is unable to properly counterattack due to Hawks's raw speed. All it would take is one slip-up from Endeavor to end the fight. And even if he was perfect in his reactions, he has less time to win the fight because the longer his quirk is active the likelier it is that Endeavor begins to take damage from self-inflicted burns. Izuku finally took a breath, only to realize that Bando, Nairenjiki, and Fukudashi were all staring at him, eyes wide and mouths hanging wide open. Or something like that. He muttered quietly, eyes downcast as his blush returned full force. Whoa, Fukudashi breathed out, that was, like, a major nerd out. Awesome. Izuku looked up in surprise. Huh? Bando nodded in agreement. It truly is incredible to see someone with such vast knowledge on heroics. Izuku turned scarlet. It's not that impressive. Just like heroes. We all like heroes, Fukudashi corrected, cackling, you love them. Izuku sputtered in an attempt to defend himself, embarrassed beyond belief, but that just made Fukudashi laugh harder. Bando wasn't far behind him, a deep chuckle emanating from him, and even Nairenjiki had to muffle himself with his hand. Fortunately for Izuku, the bell rang, and with it Vlad King entered the room, an order of get to your seats, on his lips, sparing him any more embarrassment this morning. As he took his seat, he could only wonder if they had been laughing at him, or laughing because of him. He really hoped they weren't laughing at him. All right, little listeners. Present Mike encouraged, can anybody tell me what is wrong with sentence number 4? Silence. Come on. He groaned, I know all of you had to take English in middle school. Present Mike pointedly ignored Tsunatori, the only actual native English speaker in the class, who had her hand politely raised the entire time. Izuku knew the answer, of course. He was pretty good with English, he attributed it to all the time he spent worshipping All Might and consuming as much media of the man as he could, including the half that was English. Plus when he was younger he thought it would make it easier to talk with his dad, working overseas in America and all. What an idiot he was. Izuku let out a muted sigh. Present Mike was beginning to get disheartened, and looked like he was just going to pick a random student. He really didn't want to volunteer himself, but the look in the poor teacher's eye was just too much for Izuku to handle. He didn't want to disappoint the hero again. He already did that during the entrance exam, where he made a fool of himself with his muttering. Present Mike zeroed in on Izuku's slowly raising hand like a hungry shark to a surfer. All right, he shouted, let's hear it, Midoriya. Izuku tried not to wilt under the pressure of having so many eyes on him again. The sentence uses the incorrect form of there, he said quietly, and it uses the contraction for it's when it doesn't need to. Correctamundo. Present Mike cheered, his volume perfectly countering Izuku's quietness. Now, can anybody help me out with the next one? Silence. Again. Izuku wasn't going to volunteer himself twice. Present Mike sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, although he didn't seem too mad. It was more like an exasperated fondness. Alrighty, little listeners. He clapped his hands together, before pushing off the desk he had been leaning back on. Since I can't get a measure on your English this way, homework. Textbook pages 9 and 10, all the odd-numbered problems. The class groaned in unison. Izuku could pick out Fukudashi as one of the loudest complainers in the group. Settle down, settle down. Present Mike laughed, you don't have to make sure they're all correct. I'll be grading for completion, but please put some effort into it. It'll be a benchmark for you so I know where we're all at here. Izuku listened to the class's murmurings for a few more moments, before quietly pulling out the textbook and simply getting to work, unaware of the stare he was receiving from a certain blonde girl. Izuku stretched out his sore wrist, letting out a satisfied groan as it cracked and popped. Midnight Sensei had given them a pop quiz, which included several small essays, for their first class together, and it had put Izuku's writing hand through the ringer. Midoriya-kun. Fukudashi called from a few seats ahead, things already packed, let's go get lunch. I'm hungry. But you don't eat at lunch. Bondo pointed out, causing Fukudashi to huff and his speech bubble to deflate. I am coming. Izuku called, a small smile on his face. It really was nice to have friends. Fukudashi and Bondo were awesome. Fukudashi was funny and outgoing, and was the head of their little group, ironic, wasn't it? Izuku didn't mind though, he wasn't one for the spotlight. Neither was Bondo, the boy even more of a strong silent type than he was. Not that Izuku was strong in any sense of the word, but you get the point. Hey! Green boy! Izuku wasn't proud of the squeak he made at the shout, nor the fact that he jumped a solid meter off the ground in surprise. He had to put a hand on his heart to still it, it had begun to beat rapidly at the fright he had just received. DMN, he really was a wuss. You okay? Izuku looked up, meeting the big, blue eyes of a girl. Izuku.exe has crashed. DMN, this was embarrassing. He couldn't even get a single word out. He was pretty sure he heard Fukudashi snickering in the background, him and Bondo having been lucky enough to stick around to witness this interaction. It only made his face burn more. The girl pet her head at him, blinking her eyes slowly in confusion. Wow, he kinda looks like a strawberry right now, she muttered under her breath, in English for good measure. Izuku made a weird choking sound, like he was trying to hack up a lung. SS strawberry? The girl lit up immediately, pointing a finger at him in excitement. So you do know English? Why yeah? Izuku responded, rather lamely in his opinion. The girl didn't seem to mind though, as she was busy bouncing up and down happily. This is great. She cheered, I was really hoping there was someone in my class that knew English, learning Japanese SCKS. Izuku didn't say anything, out of a mix of surprise and fear of embarrassing himself even further, allowing the girl to ramble on and on in her native tongue. Oh shoot, where are my manners? My name's Pony. She introduced herself with glee, still rocking back and forth on her heels with a bright smile on her face. It's super nice to meet ya. And nice to meet you too. My name is Midoriya Izuku. He stumbled through his words a bit. He was far from an expert in the language, and with the speed and emotion Pony was speaking with it took him a moment to grasp what she had been saying. Pony gasped, hitting herself in the forehead. Oh yeah, you guys call each other by your last names. In that case, my name's Tsunatori Pony. I'm from Texas. I wanted to go to UA just like All Might, but I didn't realize that nobody would speak English. I kinda thought it was a universal language, and that I could learn Japanese on the fly, you know. Izuku blinked, barely hanging on to what she was saying and still unsure exactly why she was talking to him. He was way out of his depth at UA, where so many people were just so nice to him for seemingly no reason. He still didn't trust it. The other shoe was going to drop at any moment. So anyways, Tsunatori continued, I've been trying to find somebody else in our class who knows English, but had zero luck. The gals are cool and all, but they can't understand me half the time, and neither can any of the guys. And it gets worse. I can't even teach myself Japanese, it's just so hard, and I'm not a good teacher. And somehow UA doesn't have tutors for this kinda stuff. Can you believe it? Izuku's mind was spiraling. Tsunatori sure did talk a lot in one breath. What did she just ask him? No? Pony let out a sigh. Yeah, it's rough. She then locked eyes with Izuku, Prussian blue meeting emerald green as she gave him a pleading look. You know where I'm going with this, right? Izuku did not, in fact, know where she was going with this, and so he awkwardly shook his head. Tsunatori didn't seem to be put off by his admission. In fact, it was as if it emboldened her as she grabbed Izuku by his hands. Izuku's face erupted in an absolutely massive blush the moment she touched his hands, and it only got worse once she took a step closer to him. Please teach me Japanese. She begged. Izuku was trying to respond. He really was. but every time he opened his mouth, nothing came out. Talking to people was never his strong suit, much less talking to pretty girls holding his hands while pleading for his help. He must have looked like a fish, with his wide eyes and gaping mouth. Izuku forced out, still barely conscious, okay? Tsunatori lit up like a Christmas tree, giving Izuku a smile so bright he nearly had to shield his eyes. Which would have been an issue, given she was still holding his hands and all that. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Tsunatori said happily, pulling Izuku in for a quick hug in the process. Izuku went catatonic. Was he dead? Was this heaven? Was UA just magical? Tsunatori let him go after a moment, seemingly unaware of the mental breakdown Izuku was experiencing. So, how is this going to work? It took a lot for Izuku to ground himself back in reality after that hug. It had been a long time since someone got that physical with him, at least while they weren't beating him up. It was nice. Realizing Tsunatori was still waiting for an answer, Izuku shook his head. I am not sure? I've never tutored someone on Japanese. Did you have a place and time in mind? Tsunatori looked thoughtful for a moment, before shaking her head. Nope. My schedule is pretty flexible, and this is super important, so it'll probably be better to work around your availability. Here, do you have a phone? He nodded, shakily pulling out his phone and offering it to her. He wasn't exactly sure why she wanted it, even though rationally there was only one reason she would ask to see his phone. Sure enough, Tsunatori took it, and in one quick swipe handed it right back to him with a new number and name in his contacts. Pony. He was happy she didn't ask about why he had so few other contacts in his phone. So just text me whenever you want to meet up, or when you have an idea on when you want to, or whatever, alright? Tsunatori asked, thanks again for agreeing to help, it means a lot to me. Izuku could only nod dumbly as Tsunatori left the room, practically skipping past Fukudashi and Bando, whose jaws were currently on the floor. Well, Bando's was. Fukudashi's would have been as well if he had a jaw to drop. Dude, Fukudashi muttered, what the hell just happened? I believe Midoriya just got Tsunatori-san's phone number, Bando said calmly. I didn't understand what they were discussing, however, so I have no clue how he did so. Fukudashi shook his speech bubble as if he were shaking his head. Midoriya. He rushed over to the greenette, shaking Izuku out of his stupor, both literally and figuratively. Fukudashi had him by the shoulders and was shaking him aggressively. How'd you do that? It's only the second day of school. You're a legend. What? I don't know. Izuku sputtered. Dude. Teach us your ways. Please. Fukudashi begged, Bando nodding sagely in agreement behind him. I want to get a girlfriend too. Izuku blushed hard. She's not my girlfriend. He denied, which caused Fukudashi to scoff in disbelief. Yeah, right. He grumbled, you can tell us all about how you wooed her at lunch. We've wasted enough time here as is. As Fukudashi dragged him to the cafeteria, with Bando thankfully grabbing his bag for him, Izuku could only wonder how he ended up in this situation. Surprisingly, he didn't mind it at all. Izuku sat in his seat, simultaneously terrified and excited beyond belief for 1B's first heroics lesson. Being excited was a given. He was going to be getting his first lesson on being a hero, who wouldn't be excited? A quick glance at his classmates told him that he wasn't alone in that mentality, many fidgeting impatiently for their teacher, or talking in hushed whispers that did nothing to hide the excitement in their voices. But what if he wasn't good enough? His classmates had been training for what was likely their whole lives to be here. Izuku was certainly going to be playing catch-up. Each of his classmates had nearly a decade on him at minimum. And if what Bando had said yesterday was accurate, All Might be teaching them. Izuku wondered if the man remembered him. Probably not. All things considered, All Might probably met thousands of people per day, and he was just some crybaby teenager, but Izuku would never forget that day. Can I be a hero like you? It was the only reason he was here right now, after all. Izuku tried to banish those thoughts. No reason to focus on old memories, the past was in the past. Besides, what were the odds that All Might would actually be a teacher at UA? Astronomically low, probably. That didn't stop Izuku from getting his hopes up. Heavy footsteps from down the hall, making their way to the classroom, alerted the students to a new arrival. Nerves shot, Izuku immediately went ramrod straight in his seat. He couldn't make out who it was, but he could hear a deep voice coming from the other side of the hall. Could it really be? The class awaited with bated breath as the door was flung open without a hint of effort. Vlad King walked in, a somewhat disgruntled look on his face and a clipboard tucked under his arm. Izuku blinked. Ken-sensei, Kendo asked, are you our foundational hero studies teacher? Vlad King huffed, rolling his eyes. No, I am only here as a substitute for today. Your heroics teacher is preoccupied for the moment. He paused for a split second, so brief it was almost unnoticeable to the class, but Izuku caught it. Vlad King then pulled out a small remote, quickly tapping a few buttons on it. Almost immediately the back wall shifted, allowing 20 coat hangers to drop from the ceiling, each carrying one standard UA physical education uniform. Everyone grab one and go get changed, Vlad King ordered, and meet me outside on the field. A moment passed. No one moved, taken off guard by the sudden instruction. Well? Vlad King barked, get a move on. That snapped the class back into reality, as everybody immediately rushed to not be the last one out of the room. A physical? Vlad King nodded at Tokai's question, unbothered by the fact that her eyebrow floating comically high up in the air. Yes. A physical with quirks, to be precise. He took a step back, giving the class a once-over with a critical eye. 50-meter sprint, standing long jump, long-distance run, you've done all of these in middle school, yes? This is merely to set a benchmark for all of you, to see where you stand. The hero course at UA is extremely rigorous, and will be very physically taxing. It's important to set up a proper schedule based on your current limitations, something that you will be going over with your actual foundational hero studies teacher soon. Vlad King then pulled out a baseball from his pocket, tossing in the air a few times before speaking again. The only difference is that now, you'll be allowed to use your quirks. While raw physical prowess is valuable, this allows me to see your creativity and how you can apply your quirks in various different aspects. Shiozaki-san, think fast. Shiozaki gasped in surprise as Vlad King tossed the baseball towards her, flinching back as her hair vines instinctively reached out and blocked her face. The baseball landed harmlessly against her torso, falling to the ground right after. Right, we'll work on that, Vlad King muttered to himself before clearing his throat awkwardly. Shiozaki-san, out of everyone in the class you scored the highest on the entrance exam. How far could you throw a softball in middle school? Blushing slightly, Shiozaki quickly picked up the baseball. Around 40 meters, sir. Vlad King nodded, before gesturing to a white circle painted on the ground. Step inside the ring, and without leaving it, throw the ball as far as you can using your quirk. If you take a step out of the circle, your score will be voided. Shiozaki hurried over, quickly stepping into the circle and clasping her hands together as she murmured something quietly to herself. Izuku almost thought it looked like she was praying, but he couldn't really tell. After a moment, likely to figure out exactly how she would throw the ball, Shiozaki looked up, a neutral expression on her face. Immediately, her hair began to twist and writhe, growing rapidly and violently as each vine wrapped around another, creating what seemed to be a slingshot? Sure enough, Shiozaki tossed the ball into the air slightly, only for it to be snapped up by the massive braid of vine hair that sat atop her head. It started to whirl around slowly, almost like how a helicopter blade swung, before picking up speed and absolutely launching the baseball. Izuku and 1B watched in awe as the baseball flew in the air for several seconds, before it finally became too far away to follow. The clipboard Vlad King was holding on to beeped, and Vlad King looked pleased as he read the results. 489 meters, well done. Shiozaki's expression remained neutral, but she had a small smile on her face as she rejoined the class. Izuku's, and pretty much everyone else's, jaw dropped. 500 meters. That was insane. How the hell was he supposed to compete with that? Holy sheet, Tsuburaba, a boy that almost looked like a brown-haired Bakugou, muttered, that was awesome. Getting to cut loose with our quirks? Awesome. There was a general chatter of agreement from a good chunk of the class, and Vlad King's eyes hardened. Awesome? He repeated derisively, immediately cutting off any talking, do you think this is a game? Are your quirks merely playthings to you all? Unsurprisingly, no one said anything, taken aback by the sudden change in tone. Vlad King allowed his stare to pierce through everyone's soul for a moment more before giving up, sighing as he relaxed his posture a bit. Look. I get it, you've likely never had the chance to show off with your quirks, he began, but all of you must remember, this is a serious matter. As I said yesterday, this will not be something you can simply float through or take lightly. Being a hero is dangerous, risky work, and if you aren't giving it your all and using the utmost care, things will end badly. So do try and take this seriously, yes? A few mutterings of agreement were heard. I said, Vlad King repeated loudly, try and take this seriously, yes? Yes, sensei. The class repeated, pleasing their teacher. Now that's what I like to hear. Vlad King smirked. Let's get to it. The class cheered. Izuku gulped. Izuku was worried. And not just the kind of anxious worry he lived with constantly. He was really worried. The tests weren't difficult. Izuku had done them all in middle school, and definitely had some marked improvement thanks to the training he had been doing over the past year. But the tests weren't the issue. Every other person in the class was definitely outperforming him, all because of their quirks. Sure, he wasn't the weakest physically, but when Komori could grow giant mushrooms to bounce off of for the repeated side steps, or Kurwaro could simply hitch a ride in Shishida's shadow to get just as good a time in the 50-meter dash, or Yui could shrink the grip strength device to get more pressure on it. To put it mildly, he was screwed. Izuku tried to reassure himself as best he could. It wasn't like he'd get punished for ending up in last place, right? He was giving it his all, just like Vlad King had said. Heck, he hadn't even said that he'd be keeping score. He definitely was. Izuku would have a target on his back for sure. It was like the universe was playing another cruel joke on him. After all those years of torment, humiliation, and agony, he finally gets a quirk, only for it to be just as worthless as. Alright, that's it for the tests. Izuku was quickly shaken from his thoughts, realizing that they had, indeed, finished. His stomach churned uncomfortably, unsure of what came next. You're dismissed. Huh? Vlad King ignored the surprised stares and raised eyebrows. As the syllabus says, you will be having foundational heroics tomorrow morning, and the day after it will be at the end of day, and repeat. I shouldn't have to say this, but please don't do anything stupid. This class will be much tougher from here on out, and I don't need one of you falling asleep in the middle of your teacher's lesson. What about our scores, sensei? A lipless boy, Hananuki, if memory served, asked. Most of us thought we would get to see how well we did. Vlad King rolled his eyes. The only reason you'd be shown your scores is to arbitrarily see how you did in comparison with your classmates, and that's unfair. All of you are different people, with different strengths and weaknesses, and different quirks. I'll keep these scores, as well as those from other exercises you do throughout the year, but only to compare your growth against yourself. Understood? Hananuki, and most of the class for that matter, just nodded quietly. Good. Vlad King smirked. Now, as I said, you are dismissed, but I would be remiss to not mention the plethora of after-school activities UA provides to its students. As Hero Course students, your options are somewhat limited in comparison to general education in terms of sports and clubs, but the gyms, library, cafeteria, and more are available to you as long as campus is open. I recommend you get familiar with them, at the very least. With that, Vlad King turned and left the class to themselves. Most of them left as well, either alone or in their own little groups, but Izuku stayed put. Midoriya-kun. Fukudashi called, let's go. Me and Bondo were gonna go get some fast food. You in? Izuku offered them a shaky smile. I'd love to, he started, but I was actually gonna go and explore the campus like Vlad King sensei suggested. I don't really eat fast food. Sorry. It's okay Midoriya-kun, Bondo said, no worries. Fukudashi slouched over dramatically. Man. You gotta be down for next time though, okay? Izuku hastily nodded. Next time, for sure. Alrighty then, see you tomorrow. And with that, Izuku was alone. Idly, he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding in. It hurt to say no to Fukudashi and Bondo, but he'd been through this sort of thing before. He liked them, and truly did hope they wanted to be his friends, but he had to play it safe for now. He wasn't going to let his guard down so easily anymore. Besides, he truly did want to explore the campus. He was hoping he could find a library. It would be a great spot to start writing new entries in his notebook for his classmates. Not that he'd ever show anyone. Izuku, just like the rest of the class, was understandably excited to finally see who their foundational hero studies teacher would be. To be fair, half the class had already met up with some students from 1A and learned about exactly who their teacher was already, but they were still pretty nervous. It wasn't every day All Might became one of your high school teachers. However, Izuku hadn't heard this information yet, and so he was still rather skeptical of the idea. That was until he heard that all-familiar laugh echo from the hallway. Ha ha ha! A thunderous voice echoed through the room, despite the speaker seemingly being far away. I am here. Coming through the door like a normal person. As if he was carried in by a tornado, All Might practically flew into the room, papers and pencils flying everywhere from the whirlwind his speed created. Izuku's, and several of his classmates, hair fluttered in the sudden breeze, undoing all the effort he had put into combing his hair earlier, not that there would have been a noticeable difference anyway. Hello, students of 1B. All Might greeted, I am All Might, and I am your foundational heroic studies teacher. Silence was all that greeted the legend. Whether it be out of surprise, awe, or in Izuku's case, reverence, no words were spoken as the symbol of peace introduced himself. It was almost unreal. All Might didn't seem fazed, merely allowing his heroic grin to slip into more of a sly smile, as though he was used to this sort of interaction happening. "It is nice to meet all of you as well." He laughed jovially, "But I believe it is time to get down to business." Just like yesterday with Vlad King and the gym uniforms, All Might gently pressed, completely crushed, a button on his remote, and 20 numbered cases immediately descended down onto the back wall. Their hero costumes. The class gasped in anticipation. "Ha!" All Might chuckled, "I remember when I was in your shoes, Zygotes. Now, who's ready to put those costumes to the test?" Cheers immediately rose up in agreement as everyone ran to grab their case. It seemed that was all he needed to say to rouse the class from their stupor. Izuku hung back a bit, not wanting to get trampled. "Wonderful." All Might's grin was nearly blinding at this point. "Then I shall see you all at ground beta, you have 10 minutes. With that, All Might disappeared in a gust of wind, similarly to how he entered, leaving 1B with their costumes and some ruffled uniforms. It was quiet for a moment, with everyone trying to grab their costumes at the same time, but eventually it calmed down enough for Shishida to make a rather astute observation. Did All Might ever specify where ground beta was? Everybody froze. A new mad dash was started, this time for the door. Izuku remained in his seat, having memorized the layout of the UA campus the moment he had received his acceptance letter. He had wanted to at least tell Fukudashi and Bondo how to get there, but they were some of the first out of the classroom. He sighed, finally standing up and grabbing the lone briefcase still hanging up. Oh well. At least he'd be able to get changed in peace. As nice as it was to not have to deal with anyone else while he was changing, Izuku forgot a key detail in his strategy. If he was alone in knowing where to go, it meant he'd be alone with All Might while everybody else was lost. Him. Alone. With All Might. Izuku realized this issue at precisely the moment he arrived at ground beta, coming to a complete stop mid-step and nearly tripping over himself. Maybe he could hurry back and wait for someone else. It didn't look like All Might had seen him. Ah, young Midoriya. Looking sharp. Or not. Izuku went ramrod straight as All Might addressed him, just as incapable of reacting normally to the man as he was 10 months ago. His mouth opened and closed for a moment, mind running a mile a minute as he attempted to figure out what to say, before he gave up and let his brain run on autopilot. Thank you, All Might sensei. His costume wasn't anything special. It was just a dark green jumpsuit, with padding around his arms, legs, and vitals. He had matching red steel-toed boots and a belt that was filled to the brim with medical supplies and other common use items a hero might need, like rope, a flashlight, and the like. His gloves were especially bulky, meant to be able to take cuts and slashes while receiving minimal damage. It gave Izuku some actual form of defense beyond hoping his padding would keep him alive. And of course, he had a mask with a built-in respirator and bunny ears that made him look like a baby version of All Might. All Might nodded, that ever-present grin shining bright as ever as he stared down the blatant imitation of himself. There was a small chance he didn't realize, of course, but he was the #1 hero. There was no way he couldn't discern some blatant fanboyism. Especially since he looked like he was holding back a laugh. "I'm glad to see you made it to UA, young man," All Might continued, voice taking a slightly lower pitch. "I knew that boy I met in that alley 10 months ago was destined for heroism." Izuku froze. So All Might did remember him. He didn't know if that was a good sign or not. Well, Izuku stammered out, it's all thanks to you, sir." All Might just laughed. "No, my boy, I'm pretty sure the one to thank for your being here is you. I wasn't the one who put in the work to be here." Izuku wanted to disagree, but who was he to argue with All Might? That would be like arguing with God for him. Actually, scratch that. That was arguing with God for Izuku. All Might opened his mouth to say something else, but paused. "It seems like your classmates are finally arriving, young Midoriya. Mind if we postpone this conversation for another time?" Izuku blinked. All Might wanted to talk more with him? What had he done to warrant that? Realizing the man was still waiting for an answer, he quickly shook his head. "And not at all, sensei." With that, All Might turned to his newly arriving class, but Izuku felt like the man's attention was still on him. What had he done to deserve such a blessing? "Nice costume, Midoriya-kun." Izuku turned to see Fukudashi and Bondo approaching him, along with what looked like everybody else from 1B. "How'd you get out here so quickly, man?" Fukudashi questioned. "You must have known the school's layout or something, this place is a maze." Izuku laughed awkwardly. "I must have just gotten lucky or something, he trailed off, unsure of how to respond to Fukudashi's rather accurate accusation. Your costumes look cool too." Fukudashi lit up, literally. A light bulb appeared in his speech bubble, and it was so bright Izuku and Bondo had to squint to see it, even through his comic panel mask. "Thanks." I couldn't think of anything to add that actually supports my quirk, but at least it looks unique. Bondo nodded in agreement. Thematically I like how my costume looks, but I wish I had a bit more in terms of support gear. Semidine doesn't really have much need for that sort of thing, though. Izuku bit his cheek. He could easily think of half a dozen different pieces of support gear for Bondo alone, and Fukudashi was a whole different story. But who wanted to hear criticism on their costume, let alone from him? It'd be better to keep his mouth shut, especially if he was wrong about some of his assumptions. Midoriya definitely looks the most badass out of us three, Fukudashi pointed out. If it weren't for the bunny ears, you might look kinda scary. Izuku flinched, but didn't disagree. Even when he was designing his costume, he didn't really like the colors, but they were the best options when it came to hiding bleeding. Well, they say the clothes make the man, ladies and gentlemen, All Might announced, immediately drowning out all other conversations, and I must say, you all certainly look like heroes. Cheers arose once again, with most of the students fawning over each other's costumes, before All Might put up a hand to silence them. Now, he chuckled, you'll have plenty of time to discuss your looks later. For now, it's time to discuss your assignment today. All Might paused, allowing the students to look around nervously between each other as the tension slowly mounted. Battle trials. Huh? You heard me right, Zygotes. All Might declared, pulling out a fishbowl with a bunch of small slips of paper inside it. Battle trials. The best way to get a feel for how things work in the big leagues is to get some real experience fighting. Here's the scenario: a team of villains has secured a fake bomb inside of this ordinary office building, and the heroes must hurry to either incapacitate the villains or touch the bomb to deactivate it. The villains win by either successfully defending the bomb for the duration of the round, or by capturing the heroes. Each round is 15 minutes, with 2 people per team. Any questions? Immediately, a slew of hands rose up. All Might was unfazed, however, and began calling names out and answering in rapid-fire succession. How will teams be picked? Using this fishbowl, I shall randomly pick 2 names. Are the villains allowed to touch the bomb and move it? Yes. The villain team can do anything they want with the bomb, seeing as they would theoretically have an understanding of how it works. Why are we fighting inside a building? Don't most villain fights happen outside in the street? Without thinking, Izuku opened his mouth at that question. Actually, most villain fights, or at least those that involve the highest-ranking villains, usually occur inside. It allows for heroes to cut loose and not worry about the prying eyes of the media during a fight, and for villains to control the fight to an extent, depending on what sorts of quirks, traps, and weapons they have at their disposal. A beat passed, and Izuku suddenly realized that every pair of eyes was suddenly on him. Immediately, he turned beet red and opened his mouth to apologize, but All Might's booming laugh beat him to it. You hit the nail on the head, young Midoriya. While it's true that many villain fights do occur in broad daylight, young aways, only the truly dastardly will fight indoors. It's those villains you have to be on the lookout for, not the petty thief who will fight GHT when cornered. How badly are we allowed to beat up our opponents? All Might tensed up at that one, narrowing his eyes at Kamakiri. There is a fine line between fighting to train, and fighting to harm others, young Kamakiri. I suggest all of you understand that. His voice was heavy and firm, unyielding as he seemingly looked the entire class in the eye at once. Yesterday, there was an incident involving excessive force in Class 1A. I will not tolerate another. The air was thick. Izuku held his breath, not wanting to make a single noise. The rest of the class was similarly quiet. But I trust all of you to not make that same mistake. All Might finished brightly, causing most of the class to breathe out a sigh of relief. Now, for the teams. All Might clumsily held out the fishbowl, allowing each student to have a turn plucking out a small piece of paper with a letter on it, signifying what team they would be on. Although Izuku was practically trembling with nervousness by the time he got close enough to All Might to take his slip, he was coherent enough to not make a fool of himself and grab it without incident. He took a look at his folded-up piece of paper, and opened it up to find a large F staring back at him. If that wasn't a sign from the universe, Izuku didn't know what was. Hey! Someone shouted from the crowd, who's got an F? Izuku flinched involuntarily at the noise, and the fact that that person would be his partner. His eyes darted over to the boy who had yelled, coming face to face with one Tetsu. What a name. The boy's hero costume was something Izuku could only describe as iron overalls. They were pulled up to his pecs, and metal suspenders held them up around his shoulders, coming together around the big red button on his chest. He also had what looked like silver combat boots, but that was it. Izuku wondered if there was some dress code rule that ordered hero students to wear a somewhat revealing costume that he missed. It wouldn't shock him, at this rate. You got an F? Tetsu questioned loudly. It took all of Izuku's meager willpower to not flinch away, and he merely nodded as he showed the steel student his paper. He nodded stoutly, and turned back towards All Might. Izuku breathed out a sigh of relief once the boy's strong gaze wasn't on him, and allowed himself to focus on the number one hero once more. Now then, All Might continued, now that you all have your teams, it's time to select the matchups. A ripple of excitement went through some of the students at that one, including Tetsu. Izuku grimaced. He hoped the boy was okay with doing most of the work. First up? Team F as the heroes and Team A as the villains. Sheet. Izuku's eyes darted around nervously, scanning for who their opponents would be. If it were someone like Fukudashi or Yanagi, he might have a shot against them, but if it were... Kamakiri stared down Tetsu and Izuku, easily having picked them out from the other side of the group. His insect-like mandibles twitched, and Izuku gulped in fear. Shishida stood next to him, eyeing them up in a similar manner, albeit not as intensely as Kamakiri was. Double sheet. Kamakiri and Shishida were two of the strongest in the class, at least if what he had seen during yesterday's Quirk physical was any indicator. Tetsu didn't seem like much of a slouch either, which left poor little Izuku as the obvious weak link on the team. Here are your building schematics, gentlemen. All Might quickly swooped by all four of them, dumping a handful of papers and blueprints into each of their arms. Villains, go to the building and figure out where you're going to place your bomb. Heroes, you have 10 minutes to plan. Use them wisely. Izuku nodded, but with how anxious he was you'd think he was having a seizure. He probably wasn't that far off of one, at any rate. So, Tetsu trailed off. What's the plan? Izuku squeaked like a stuffed animal. What? Tetsu rolled his eyes. The plan. What are we gonna do to win? Izuku was confused. Was his teammate telling him to make a plan or asking him to strategize? Well, maybe we should come up with one together? What's your quirk? Nah, Tetsu shot him down immediately. I'm kinda dumb. And you're really scrawny and didn't do all that well in the physical yesterday, but you're still in the hero course, so I gotta guess you're really smart to make up for that. Izuku blinked, taken aback. Was that a compliment, an insult, or both? Anyways, the steel boy continued, a savage grin on his face. My quirk's called Real Steel. It lets me turn my entire body into steel, or just parts, or whatever I want. Pretty metal, huh? Izuku nodded. That was a powerful quirk. It almost made him kind of jealous. Well, he mumbled, if you want me to make a plan, then sure. Based on the schematics we were given, the buildings have 5 floors, with over 24 rooms per floor. It would be impossible to clear out every room given the time limit of 15 minutes, so it makes sense to try and rule out some things. The first and last floors are almost guaranteed to not have the bomb placed there, considering how obvious of a spot they would be, and we can likely cut out the second floor as well since it would take us no time at all to find it. That leaves us 2 floors to search, which is doable but not ideal since there are still a ton of rooms to search and we're more likely than not going to have to fight Kamakiri and Shishida. Kamakiri's attitude might work as an advantage for us, however, seeing how he looks like he was hunting for a fight, so maybe dash. Tetsu slapped him on the back, enough to shake him out of his mumbling spree. Dude, what the hell are you saying? Izuku's face flushed. Here he was, mumbling again like a weirdo to someone he barely knew. He was such an idiot. Nothing, Izuku muttered, sorry. Tetsu ignored him, focusing his attention towards the building they were about to clear. So do you got a plan or what? Izuku was quiet for a moment, before finally nodding. A small smile made its way onto his face, but it was thankfully covered by his mask. Yeah, I think I do. And the hero team has entered the building. All Might announced over the intercom, the match has begun. Heroes, your 15 minutes starts now. Tetsu gave him a sideways glance. You sure this will work? Maybe. Tetsu shrugged. Whatever. If we lose, it's on you. Izuku gulped, and took a seat on the floor. Tetsu followed. A minute passed. Nothing. 2 more. Nothing. Another minute. Izuku was starting to think he might have made a mistake. Noth. Tip. Above them, someone was clearly running down the halls, making their way to the stairs. And fast. Tetsu stood up with a savage grin, clanging his ironclad fists together even as Izuku pulled himself into the nearest empty room. He slammed it shut as soon as he could, before pressing himself up against the wall. With any luck, he'd get his signal. A few seconds later, Kamakiri practically flew down the hall, enraged. There you are. He snarled, what the hell are you two doing? You know you have to fight us, right? And where's the green kid? Tetsu scoffed. Nice try, villain. he goaded, but today your opponent will be me. I shall best you with the power of real steel. Izuku held back a facepalm at Tetsutetsu's acting, but it did the trick nonetheless. I'll show you steel. Kamakiri took the bait hook, line, and sinker. Eat blades. In a whirlwind of swords and axes, Kamakiri rushed at Tetsutetsu. The steel hero barely had time to harden his skin before Kamakiri was upon him, sparks shooting out across his body as metal met metal. Tetsutetsu was tough, but Kamakiri was relentless, slowly pushing him back towards the entrance of the building. However, Kamakiri was completely focused on Tetsutetsu, exactly what they wanted. Izuku snuck up behind Kamakiri quietly, capture tape in hand. It would only take one moment and Izuku tackled Kamakiri right as he was poised to deliver a downward slash across Tetsutetsu's torso. The boy was taken completely by surprise, so much so that he was unable to resist as Izuku pulled the capture tape tight around his torso. Kamakiri has been captured. All Might announced, the hero team has 8 minutes left. F-. Kamakiri sneered, what the hell was that? Tetsutetsu smirked, raising his hand into the air. You got played. Up top? Midoriya. Izuku blinked. What did he mean by that? Come on, dude. Don't leave me hanging. Oh. Tetsutetsu wanted him to give him a high five. When was the last time he'd given a high five to someone? Izuku had to jump. Tetsutetsu was tall, and he was the second shortest boy in the class, but hit Tetsutetsu's waiting hand with a resounding smack. Now let's go get that bomb. Alright. Hey! Kamakiri shouted from the floor, what about me? Alas, he was ignored, with Izuku and Tetsutetsu already running towards the stairwell. Assholes. So, Tetsutetsu breathed out, what now? We got, 4 floors to search? Izuku shook his head, panting as he rested his hands on his knees. No. We would have heard Kamakiri sooner if he had started on the 2nd floor, and the 5th floor is too obvious, in a manner similar to how the 1st would have been. That leaves the 3rd and 4th floors, and there is an obvious choice between them to start from. What? Tetsutetsu was lost. Izuku didn't blame him. He sighed. Based on a lot of math laws and probability and randomness junk, he hurried to explain, there's a much better chance they chose a room on the 4th floor. We need to hurry and clear them together, since one of us alone could easily lose to Shishida and leave the other out of luck. Tetsutetsu nodded. Doesn't make sense to me, but it doesn't need to. They hurried, rushing from door to door as quickly as possible, but there were a lot of rooms. It was boring and monotonous, leaving some room for talking. So, Tetsutetsu asked in between slamming doors open, what's your quirk? You never told me. I didn't? Izuku wondered aloud, oh. Sorry, it must have never come up. It's nothing special, and isn't exactly well suited to this exercise. Tetsutetsu raised an eyebrow in surprise. Oh. Then I don't care. Huh? Izuku blinked. Tetsutetsu shrugged as he kicked down another door. Yeah, I was only asking because I wanted to know if we needed it to win. I don't really care otherwise. Okay, then. Tetsutetsu was very honest, if nothing else. Izuku could respect that. Speaking of Tetsutetsu, Izuku jerked his head over towards his teammate as he threw one final door open in victory. Found the bomb. Izuku smiled. Nice. A low chuckle caused both the heroes to freeze. Took you long enough, gentlemen. Inside the room, standing alone in front of the bomb, was Shishida. His hairy chest exposed for the world to see. Why were so many of his classmates' costumes so revealing? Don't get him started on some of the girls, burly arms crossed in front of them. I see you took out my comrade, he sneered, but the road ends here. For I, the great evil beast from the east shall defeat you. Tetsutetsu burst into laughter, falling to the floor as he held his sides in pain. Dude, what the F-? He wheezed, cackling like a madman, T the beast of the east? Shishida looked offended. It is my villain name for this exercise. He shouted angrily, before pushing his glasses back into position. Speaking of, Izuku could only watch on in horror as Shishida began to grow and grow, limbs stretching and widening at an alarming rate, until Shishida stood several heads above both of them. He snarled angrily, like the two had disturbed his nap. Be gone. Shishida howled, or face your doom. With that, Shishida slammed one monstrously large hand down. Izuku yelped and hurried to dodge, barely avoiding sharing Tetsutetsu's fate of being sent crashing down to the floor below. Triple sheet. Ack! Tetsutetsu screamed, before being muffled by the sound of concrete and metal creaking inwards to fall on top of him. I'll be right back up there, Midoriya. Don't get caught. Easier said than done, Izuku thought. Shishida turned towards Midoriya with a dark grin. Care to surrender? He offered snidely, or would you like to share the same fate as, hey, what are you doing? Izuku had burst into a sprint the moment Shishida began to fall into a monologue again, desperate to end the match quickly. All Might had announced that they only had 5 minutes a good while ago, and who knew how long it would take Tetsu to get back. The bomb was only a few meters away. If he was lucky he could get to it. Shishida snatched him up in one huge hand, crushing his hopes immediately. A valiant effort, he boasted, but unfortunately, the road ends here. Yeah, right. Izuku had come this far, he wasn't about to give up. He was really close to giving up. His body was squeezed tightly into Shishida's hand, but his arms were still free. He had one chance to do something, anything, to distract Shishida, and he had to act quickly. He grabbed onto a handful of hair on Shishida's arm, took a deep breath, and yanked with all his might. Yoch! Shishida yelped, reflexively dropping Izuku onto the ground. That hurt, hero. Izuku wasted no time in running straight at Shishida, who looked at him weirdly but nonetheless readied himself for a fight. Until Izuku slid between his legs and hopped onto his back. What the? Get off of me! Shishida growled, this is unbecoming of a hero. Izuku said nothing, too busy trying not to be bucked from Shishida as he began to reach around his back for the small boy. He had to move around a lot, which was hard, doubly so with the way Shishida was jumping around trying to get him to lose his grip, shaking the building by its foundations, but was relatively safe. At least until Shishida slammed his back against the wall. Izuku let go with a gasp, his body going limp as he was crushed between the two. He fell to the floor limply, causing Shishida to wince. Apologies, Midoriya-san, he tried, I did not mean to hurt you in such a manner. Izuku gasped for breath, the hit having knocked all the air out of him. He shook his head to the best of his ability. I'm okay. All of a sudden, the door flew open again to reveal Tetsu completely covered in dust and plaster. I'm back. He shouted, immediately throwing himself at Shishida, and I'm not about to lose. Shishida scoffed. Your partner is incapacitated, and you are so tiny. What hope do you have to stand against me? Tetsu blinked. What do you mean? Midoriya's fine. Shishida turned in a panic, and sure enough, Izuku had pulled himself up just in time to throw himself into the side of the, thankfully fake, bomb. The hero team has secured the bomb. All Might announced, the hero team wins. Please return to the viewing room for evaluation. Hell yeah. Tetsu hooped, nice going, Midoriya. Izuku nodded, leaning back against the wall again as Shishida shrunk back down to normal. Do you need assistance, Midoriya-san? The bespectacled boy offered, I truly am sorry about that hit. Izuku shook his head again. I am fine, just give me a sec, whoa. Tetsu shook his head, lifting Midoriya up and over his shoulder. You heard All Might. We gotta get going. But you don't need to carry me. Izuku shrieked. Tetsu just laughed, Shishida following them with an odd look on his face. Izuku and Tetsu were swarmed by their classmates the moment they returned, but All Might was thankfully to return everyone to attention before an uproar broke out. So, All Might began, can anyone tell me who the MVP of this match was? Several hands shot up immediately, to All Might's surprise and joy. Let's hear from you, young Awaze. It was Tetsu, right? Awaze answered proudly, he was the one who took on Kamakiri and distracted him for Midoriya to capture him, and did pretty much the same with Shishida. No way. Tetsu protested, it was totally Midoriya. He came up with the plan to get Kamakiri alone and figured out which floor the bomb was on through sheer guesswork. And he got the bomb. He should be MVP. I agree. All Might nodded. While young Tetsu was very efficient in his execution of their plan, it was young Midoriya who was the brains behind the operation and secured their victory. Very well done to both sides, regardless. Very well done my butt. Kamakiri hissed quietly, we got creamed. All Might gave him a fond look. That may be so, young Kamakiri, but fret not. This was just an exercise, and your first one at that. No one is perfect. There will be plenty of time for you to learn from your mistakes today and grow. Kamakiri still looked a little sad, but seemed to accept All Might's explanation with a nod. At least he didn't look like he wanted to kill Izuku. If this was Bakugou, there was no doubt Izuku would have been turned into a red stain on the ground by this point. Anyways, All Might continued, our next match is Team C as the heroes and Team B as the villains. Get into your positions using the next building over. Young Shishida did a number on the last one. With that dismissal, Yanagi, Tsuburaba, Kaibara, and Kanoko all stood and hurried to the door, leaving Izuku alone. With a bunch of his classmates who were looking at him weirdly. Great. Hey, Parsley. Izuku instinctively turned to his left to see who addressed him in such an odd way, only to see nothing but a floating head with sharp teeth and long green hair. he screamed, jumping like a cat that just had a bucket of ice water dumped on him. The head cackled, even as another student began to admonish it. Oh, man. That was too easy. Sorry about that, Parsley, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. The name's Tokage Setsuna, but you can call me anytime. Tokage-san. Another greenette admonished, why were there so many people with green hair in this class? That is no way to greet a fellow classmate. Ah, come on Ibara. Tokage ummed, it was so funny. Fukudashi cackled in agreement from beside Izuku, an XD emoticon taking up his speech bubble. It really was. Izuku gulped as Tokage, Shiozaki, and the rest of his classmates began to introduce themselves, and started to pester him and Tetsu with questions about their victory. He smiled either way. It was nice to be on the receiving end of praise for once. Even if some of his classmates were rather eccentric. Oh well. Anyone was better than Bakugou. Izuku stared at the mob of people gathered around UA's entrance nervously, wondering just how he was supposed to make it through the mass of news reporters. He didn't really want to interact with any of them, so waiting until they left seemed like a smart move, but he had been doing that for the past 30 minutes to no avail. A few students had gathered their courage and simply tried to walk through the conglomerate to mixed results, but Izuku was sure that wouldn't go too well for him. Midoriya-kun? Izuku was proud of the fact that he only jumped a little bit at the surprise at being called out, quickly turning around to see. Kendo-san? Kendo offered him a bright smile and wave as she walked up to him. Hi. Good morning, Midoriya-kun. Izuku's attempt at a smile was much worse than hers was, shaky and forced as he realized he was alone with a girl from his class. A very pretty girl, at that. Likewise. He tried. Kendo hummed, running a hand through her orange ponytail as she looked over at the crowd of people still pushing to get into UA. What's up with that? Izuku shrugged lamely. I'm not sure, to be honest. I tried getting past them, but they just started asking about All Might and what it's like having him as a teacher. Kendo made a face, wrinkling her nose at the reporters. Well, that's just peachy, isn't it? They really aren't gonna budge then, huh? Izuku shook his head. Kendo stared at the mass for a few more seconds until she snapped her fingers, a light bulb seemingly going off in her mind. I've got a plan, Midoriya-kun. She said, a devious smile on her face. Are you ready? Are ready for what? Whoa! Kendo lightly grabbed him by the wrist, making his face explode in pink. She began to drag him towards the crowd, growing her free hand to its larger size while doing so. Out of my way! She shouted at the crowd, waving her hand around to shoo any unsuspecting news crews out of the way. He needs a doctor. What? Izuku involuntarily made a strange choking sound that really hammered home Kendo's act, causing her shouts to quicken as she urged, ordered, and nudged, shoved, people out of their way as they approached UA's entrance. Once they reached the gate, an incredibly irate Cementos quickly ushered them inside before any other reporters could try and sneak in. Mercifully, Kendo let go of his arm right away, a sheepish look on her face. Sorry about that, she apologized, but I didn't want to be late, you know. Besides, it worked really well. Izuku just focused on taking deep breaths, trying not to lose his mind at the embarrassment and surprise exercise he had just faced. It's fine, he wheezed, don't worry about it. Kendo still looked a little guilty, but shook her head quickly to dispel any lingering embarrassment. Alright, cool, she exclaimed, quickly turning on a heel and walking towards the building. Come on, Midoriya-kun. We don't want to be late for homeroom. Izuku blinked, before dumbly realizing that Kendo was actually waiting for him. Alright. He hurried to catch up to his classmate, who was waiting for him patiently. Once he reached her, they began to slowly make their way to 1B. Izuku breathed out a sigh of relief as the disaster that was this morning seemed to finally be ending. Surely nothing else bad would happen today, right? Class representatives? Vlad King nodded. Yes. By the end of homeroom I expect the names of a class representative and vice representative on my desk. I'll leave it up to all of you on how you want to pick, whether it be a vote, asking me to select them, drawing straws, whatever. Just know that the representatives you select will be the leaders of Class 1B for the next 3 years. With his little spiel finished, Vlad King sat down behind his desk, content to observe as the class burst into chaos. Make me class representative. Izuku wasn't sure who said that line, but there were at least a half-dozen other screams along that line that drowned out any semblance of maturity. Oh well. Izuku wasn't exactly raring to throw his name in the ring. He was more than happy to let someone else take a spot at the top of the class. It wasn't as if people would want him as a representative anyways. A resounding clap echoed through the room like thunder, immediately putting a stop to all the chatter. Kendo stood at the front of the room, hand enlarged, glaring down at the class with a downright scary look in her eyes. Enough. she shouted, despite the fact that the class had quieted immediately following her clap. Look at you guys. Are you really gonna sit here and scream about wanting to be class representatives? We're all training to be heroes, act like it. A few of the particularly loud students mumbled out apologies to Kendo and Vlad King, but most of them were waved off. Now then, Kendo said with a smile, clapping her normally sized hands together, and wasn't that scary, how she shifted her tone so quickly. How do you guys want to pick class representatives? Most of the class seemed to have been muted following Kendo's reprimand, but Shishida tentatively raised his hand. How about a vote? He offered, whoever gets the most votes will become class representative, and second place will be the vice representative. That way, we can choose from ourselves those who we feel are best representative of the class. Kendo shrugged. Sure. But how will we keep people from voting for themselves? Just let them? Tokage wondered aloud. It's not like you can't vote for yourself in real life, after all. Kendo hummed. Ken-sensei, can we have a few pieces of paper for everybody to write their vote out on? Vlad King nodded, tossing her a stack of blank pages, watching intently as she began to hand them out to the class. Izuku accepted his gratefully, before turning his attention to the page, mind racing. Who did he want to vote for? Obviously not himself, that was for sure. Fukudashi had clearly wanted the position if the way he had thrown his hands in the air and began shouting was any indicator, but was he really the best person for the job? Probably not. He was his friend and a cool guy, but Izuku thought he might get bored of it too easily. Bondo didn't seem to show any interest in it either, so he could be crossed off the list. Who else was there? Shiozaki seemed polite and well-mannered, but he didn't know her very well beyond her introduction to him yesterday. Tetsu, Tokage, and Kamakiri were out. Kamakiri sort of scared him, and Tetsu and Tokage both seemed like the antithesis of what a class representative would stand for. Kendo was a possibility. She was nice to everyone from what Izuku had seen, and was pretty good at keeping everybody in line apparently, but Shishida had come up with the idea of voting to choose a representative, and seemed very much so interested in the job. Plus, during the battle trials yesterday, he had taken the time to check on him after he was slammed into the wall. That had to count for something, right? His mind made up, Izuku quickly scribbled down Shishida's name before hurrying over to the small pile of papers that had begun to form on Vlad King's desk. Once he dropped his down, he simply waited for the rest of the class to finish up, which didn't take very long. Vlad King eyed the list of papers in front of him, before sighing and beginning to tally the votes. Once he was done, he stood up with a huff, something that caused everyone to straighten up. All right then, I suppose congratulations are in order, Vlad King announced. Say hello to your representatives for the next 3 years. Kendo-san will be your class representative, while Midoriya Izuku will be your vice rep. Come on up and say a few words, won't you? What? Izuku's body was on autopilot as he walked to the front of the classroom, and even as he turned to face his fellow students he kept his eyes trained squarely on the back wall. His posture was a stark cry from Kendo's, who looked relatively fine with her appointment to class rep. Well, thanks everyone. Kendo began, a sheepish smile on her face. I'm kinda surprised you guys chose me, but I'll make sure that the trust you put in us isn't misplaced. We'll do our best to ensure that we have a great 3 years together. The class clapped politely, and thankfully Vlad King dismissed them back to their seats after Kendo's little spiel. Izuku was fine with not talking, still trying to figure out how he of all people had been chosen. Was today opposite day or something? Vlad King coughed into his hand, once again redirecting the class's scuttled attention back to him. One last thing before I let you all go for the PRD, he finished, a more serious look appearing on his face. I reviewed the footage from the battle trials you participated in yesterday with all might. Overall, good job for your first time sparring. A few notes, however. He began to turn towards a few of Izuku's classmates as he spoke, calling out brief praises or criticisms. Yui-san, try not to be so stiff next time, alright? Yui nodded impassionately. Fukudashi-kun, learn to control your nerves, or at least your screams so that they don't bring down another building, alright? Fukudashi gave him a salute, already having moved past the embarrassment that was accidentally screaming so loud with his quirk a building fell down on him. He was fine after they were able to dig him up from the rubble. Midoriya-kun. Izuku tensed, already fearing for the worst. Was his plan that bad? Was he just too bad at the combat aspect? Was he? Good work dissecting your opponents, Vlad King stated simply, though perhaps you should make it more digestible to your partner next time. Speaking of which, Tetsu. Don't try to get out of strategizing by claiming you're just too dumb. Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. When was the last time any of his homeroom teachers spoke to him directly without reprimanding him? Not any time recently, at least. Until now. Maybe UA was different. Or more likely, it's because they don't know you. Once they know the truth, everything will go back to normal. Izuku shuddered as the darker corners of his mind reared their ugly head. Those thoughts were better left untouched. Hey, congrats on getting the vice rep job. Fukudashi praised, plopping his backpack down next to him as he took a seat at their lunch table. Didn't know you wanted it. Izuku stared down at his bowl of katsudon blankly. I didn't. Bando ped his head to the side. Really? You seem like a natural second in command, Midoriya-kun. Quite intelligent, yet somewhat lacking in social skills, standing in Kendo-san's shadow seems perfect for you. Fukudashi burst into laughter as Midoriya dropped his head against the table with a resounding thud. I didn't even vote for myself, he groaned. I don't know how I got the job. Bando shrugged. For what it's worth, Midoriya-kun, I voted for you. What? Fukudashi shrieked, an exclamation point popping up in his speech bubble. I told you I wanted the job, traitor. I felt that Midoriya-kun would be more suited to the job, Bando admitted sheepishly. Sorry about that. Fukudashi huffed, flopping back grumpily against his chair. Whatever, he grumbled, before turning back towards Midoriya. Any idea who else voted for you? No way a single vote was enough to get the position. Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but was immediately cut off by the screech of an alarm. His hands shot to his ears as the blaring reached ungodly levels of noise, and he watched as just about everyone else in the cafeteria stood up and made a mad dash for the exit. He remembered Principal Nizu saying something about the alarm system during orientation. Based on what he could remember, this alarm signified a security breach at UA, and every student should get up. Fukudashi shouted, pulling Midoriya to his feet with one hand. We gotta get outta here. See, calm down. Izuku squeaked back, his voice nearly drowned out by the droning of the alarm. There's no point in panicking. Easy for you to say. Fukudashi yelled back, it's every man for themselves out here. You're lucky I snagged you. Izuku briefly glanced around, trying to see if he could find Bando in this mess. He was tall and particularly easy to pick out in a crowd, but for the life of him he couldn't find his friend. His eyes darted over towards the windows. Maybe Bando had been pushed all the way over there? As his eyes scanned the area, Izuku frowned as he continued to be unable to locate him. Also, he was getting shoved around pretty violently by some of the other students. That wasn't fun. Wait a second, was that the press from earlier? Izuku's mind ground to a halt. Sure enough, past the remains of what used to be UA's front gate stood a few dozen reporters and cameramen, all rushing towards the entrance of the school. From this distance, Izuku thought he could make out a few of them from this morning. Fukudashi-san. Izuku hissed, it's not a break-in. It's just the press. Huh? Fukudashi shouted, I can't hear you. Izuku rolled his eyes, something he wouldn't dare to do in any other circumstances, especially not to someone who was trying to be his friend. He grabbed Fukudashi's shoulder and twisted him so that he could see out the window as well. Oh shit. Fukudashi gasped, it's just those news people again. Izuku bit back a groan. Fukudashi was something else sometimes. Fukudashi. Izuku hissed, catching the boy's attention again, can you make an onomatopoeia that, I don't know, can drown out the sound of the alarms for a second? Fukudashi put a hand to his chin, thoughtfully. Probably. Want me to do it right now? Yes. Izuku groaned. When else would he want him to do that? Fukudashi inhaled deeply, before the sound of roaring wind immediately drowned out the alarms, the screams, and every other noise that was present in the cafeteria. The pfush kanji that came along with Fukudashi's onomatopoeia flew off his face, growing large enough to completely cover the alarms in the ceiling. Just like that, the cafeteria was quiet. Izuku breathed out a sigh of relief. Until he realized that there were now several hundred pairs of eyes on him and Fukudashi. F-. Come on, dude. Fukudashi whispered, nudging Izuku, say something. Izuku opened his mouth to retort, but any possible responses died on his tongue. The whole everybody in the massive room staring you down thing was not helping much. Izuku tried to say something, anything, but to no avail. Instead, he settled for pointing out the window, where the students were treated to the same sight that he and Fukudashi had seen. As you can see, it's just the press, Izuku muttered, tapping his fingers together awkwardly. According to protocol you all need to calm down and return to your homerooms in a calm and orderly manner. Please. A few groans rose up, but they weren't directed at Izuku. Slowly, everyone began to shuffle out of the cafeteria, no longer panicking like they were minutes before. Izuku breathed out, slouching as everyone's focus shifted away from him. Holy shit! Fukudashi exclaimed, another exclamation point appearing in his speech bubble. I can't believe that worked. Izuku sighed. Me neither. Are we really supposed to go to homeroom now? Fukudashi questioned. You'd think they'd let us go after all this. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Did you not pay attention during orientation? They went over this exact situation. Nope. Izuku bit back a groan. Of course he didn't. The moment Izuku and Fukudashi returned to their classroom, 18 pairs of eyes snapped to them. Or more accurately, 18 pairs of eyes snapped to Izuku. Dude! Tetsu shouted, that was awesome. Huh? Tsuburaba nodded fervently. Yeah. The way you just took control over the situation so easily was nuts. As expected of our vice rep, Shishida added with a firm nod. Izuku's face turned scarlet as more and more of his fellow classmates joined in on the praise heaping, completely embarrassed and out of his league. Something Fukudashi picked up on. Hey! He groused, pointing an accusatory finger at the rest of the class, what about me? I was the one who made it all quiet and stuff. Yeah, but did you come up with the idea? Tokage teased, waggling her finger at him as he balked, didn't think so. Pfft, I still did it. Laughter ensued, and even Izuku had to hide his smile as Fukudashi took the attention off of him. After a few more moments Vlad King walked in, eyes narrowed and face grim. The cheery mood slowly died as everyone recognized the harsh look on their teacher's face, with only a few seconds needed for the class to quiet down. Vlad King rubbed his eyes tersely. Good job getting here, everyone. Class is dismissed. What? Kendo prodded, like we're going back to lunch? Their teacher shook his head. No, class is dismissed. You can all go home for the day, classes were cancelled thanks to the press break-in. That got a reaction out of some people, a slew of shocked gasps and hushed cheers, mainly from Aways and Tsuburaba, rising up from the crowd of students. But Kan-sensei? Shishida protested, why is the principal closing the school early on account of a press break-in? Surely this has happened before, no? No, it hasn't. Vlad King responded gruffly, there's a big metal gate out front for a reason. Security will be getting an upgrade tonight, and Principal Nizu saw fit to dismiss all of you after what happened. You can still stay on campus, but please try not to disturb anyone. With that, Vlad King turned and marched right back out of the room, leaving the rest of the class to their own devices. Izuku craned his head to look at Tsunotori, who sat a few seats ahead of him. Sure enough, she was looking back towards him, a somewhat worried look on her face. He offered her a thumbs up to let her know that he was still on for their tutoring session, and she brightened immediately. It didn't take long for groups of his classmates to begin to head out themselves. Aways, Kaibara, Rin, and Tsuburaba shot out the door the moment Vlad King disappeared, with Kamakiri and Tetsu not too far behind. Midoriya-kun. Fukudashi shouted, already heading for the door with Bondo, we're outta here. You coming with? Izuku shook his head. I would like to, but I can't, he explained apologetically, shifting a bit so Kuwaro could pass him, I'm helping to tutor Tsunotori in English today. Fukudashi bobbed his head, waggling his now existing eyebrows. Fair play, Midoriya-kun, fair play, he lauded, clapping slowly, don't have too much fun now, you hear? Before Fukudashi could tease him any more, Bondo grabbed him by the back of his collar. Fukudashi immediately began to protest, but it had no effect on Bondo, who simply dragged him out of the classroom. Have a nice day, Midoriya-kun, Bondo called over Fukudashi's shrieks, see you tomorrow. See you. Man, he had some weird friends, huh? Not that he was one to talk. Tsunotori trotted over to him, a gleaming grin on her face. Izuku idly realized that they were the last ones in the room, a thought that nearly made him break out into nervous sweats. Are you ready to go? She asked, tail swishing behind her. Yep. Izuku replied, fair warning though, I've never tried tutoring anybody, much less in Japanese, so. Tsunotori giggled. I'm sure it'll be fine. You sure seem to have English down pat, how hard could this be? Besides, I voted you for class rep for a reason, you got this. Izuku shrugged. Guess we'll find out? That's the spirit. With that, Tsunotori began to hustle down to the library, Izuku in tow. Despite the odd circumstances that had occurred around him today, Izuku smiled as he looked back on it, and looked forward to what the future held for him at UA. Two bad things were about to get really bad. Not that Izuku knew. Hey wait, did you say you voted for me? Shigaraki smirked as he silently crept through the empty halls of UA. It really was too easy. Just like Sensei said. A subtle tip to the press here, a hot new story about All Might teaching at UA there, and all of a sudden the media created the perfect coverage for him to sneak in and grab what he could. And now he had all the time in the world. It only took a few more moments to arrive at his destination, the teacher's lounge. All the info he could ever need would almost certainly be found here. Sensei knew that All Might was a teacher here already, that much was obvious. What he needed, though, was a class itinerary. Something that gave him some information on when and where All Might would be, and when he could strike. The Nomu was almost ready, after all, and Shigaraki was itching to test it. All of a sudden, the shouts and alarms quieted as though a blanket had been thrown over them. Shigaraki froze momentarily. Did UA deal with the media faster than expected? Had the panic that he had woven into each of them so well been quelled so soon? Regardless, it seemed as though he would have less time than he hoped. He would have to be quick. There was no point in subtlety anymore. He scoured the room like there was no tomorrow, ripping it apart with unbridled fury even as the muffled sound of footsteps began to slowly approach. He only had a few moments before someone discovered him, and that would ruin everything. Aha! With a wild, victorious grin he ripped apart a binder labeled 1B. Everything he needed was in there, including a trip to one unforeseen simulation joint. How ironic. Shigaraki would make sure that something unforeseen occurred indeed. Maybe the death of the symbol of peace, for starters? Look sharp, everyone. Vlad King barked, you better be on your best behavior today. Kendo nodded sternly by his side. We've got to show our teachers that we're the better hero class. Izuku was also there, idly watching as the rest of his class loaded onto the bus. Today they had a field trip to 1USJ, something that Class 1A had apparently done a week prior to mixed results. According to some rumors that only reached his ears thanks to Fukudashi and Tokei's unparalleled ability to gossip, their rival class had not only been very abrasive to the thought of rescue training over actual combat, 3 guesses as to who could have been behind that, but had also given their teachers quite the headache. And, of course, someone from Class 1A had apparently begun gloating over the fact that they were in the superior class. That was something that none of his classmates had taken well. Izuku didn't really care. His main concern was staying under Bakugou's radar, and that had thankfully worked out so far. If someone else wanted to be a JRK from that class, it was no skin off his back. He did wear his costume as well, though, if they were going to be doing rescue training, it was the perfect opportunity for him to get some practice with first aid. Izuku clambered onto the bus last, taking the lone free seat between Tokage and Bondo. It was pretty lucky that he got to sit next to one of his friends, and Tokage didn't seem that bad either. At least not until the bus started moving. So, Parsley. Tokage began, laying a friendly elbow on Izuku's shoulder that immediately stressed him out to no end. What's your deal? Huh? Izuku stuttered, taken aback. What do you mean, Tokage-san? Tokage smirked. Didn't I tell you to call me Setsuna? Or at least hot stuff. Izuku choked on his spit. Fukudashi howled with laughter from the other side of Bondo. Anyways, she continued, unperturbed by Izuku's reaction, I like to think of myself as a person who can read other people pretty well, you dig? Izuku nodded slowly, unsure of where she was going with this. So what I'm basically getting at is this, you're kinda weird, Parsley. Tokage finished, giggling at the awkward look Izuku gave her. You seem all nerdy and quiet most of the time, but then you're no stranger to taking charge like during the battle trials and that whole lunchroom fiasco. Yui nodded stoically from across the aisle. That was hot. Izuku made a strange wheezing sound at that comment, completely out of his depth. Bondo patted his shoulder awkwardly, even as he rumbled quietly in amusement. Fukudashi had none of the same courtesies, bursting into giggles for the second time as an XD emoticon appeared in his speech bubble. Dude, stop! He cried, holding his sides as he doubled over with laughter. I can't take it. It's too funny. Please. Tokage ignored Fukudashi's wailing, content to pop her head off her body and floated directly in front of Izuku's face, making him squeak like a mouse yet again. So what's going on in that little head of yours, Greenie? She questioned again, you got 2 different people fighting over your body or something? Izuku shook his head awkwardly, slightly uncomfortable by how close Tokage's face was to his. And not that I know of, Tokage-san. He coughed into his shoulder, trying to avoid her curious gaze. I'm just how I am. He accentuated his statement with a weak shrug and a forced smile, but it didn't seem to satisfy Tokage's curiosity. Maybe it's because of Midoriya-kun's quirk. Fukudashi postured, no longer afflicted with the giggles. It is a pretty weird one. Yanagi suddenly inserted herself into the conversation, humming from her spot next to Yui. It isn't unheard of for quirks to influence our personalities, she added, although many debates are held on whether or not quirks influence us, or the other way around. You mean our personalities control our quirks? Bondo questioned. Quirk mutations are random, are they not? Yanagi shrugged elegantly. I know not. All I am privy to is the knowledge that many researchers are exploring previously unheard of theories in regards to quirk evolution, and that many previously upheld inferences have been appended in the past few years. We're getting off topic. Tokage reprimanded, shifting back towards Izuku. So, what is your quirk then? I kinda assumed it was that your hair was green, or that it made you speak in mumbles. It's nothing special, he admitted, dimly aware that a good portion of the class was now interested in their conversation. It just never came up. My quirk, Fukudashi cut him off just before he could explain. Can I say it, Midoriya-kun? Bando stared at the headless boy like he'd just grown a real face. Why do you want to reveal Midoriya-kun's quirk? Fukudashi gave an over-exaggerated shrug, rolling his shoulders. I just think it's really cool. I want to see how people react to it. Hey, Midoriya-kun, wanna test it real quick? Now probably isn't the best time for that. Izuku deadpanned. They were about to go and do rescue training, what good would? We're here. Vlad King called, everyone off the bus. Nuts. Fukudashi snapped his fingers. It probably would have scared the shit out of everyone. Izuku flinched involuntarily at that. He hated being reminded of how awful his quirk was. Maybe it's better that we didn't, then, Bando interjected, pulling himself up to his feet. We aren't training to be delinquents, after all. Fukudashi stuck a tongue emoji onto his face. PFT, you're no fun. They all slowly filed off the bus, entering the USJ in a state of awe. The place was absolutely massive. Just from what Izuku could see from his spot at the entrance to the dome, there was a ruined mock-up of a city, a giant lake, hundreds of trees, and several small mountains. He wondered how UA had the budget for this. As 1B marched into the building, they were greeted by none other than the space hero, 13. All Might was also there, talking under his breath to, wait. Hold on a second. All Might was here. Bando gave him a weird look as he squealed like an 8-year-old girl, but even that didn't stop his joy from bubbling up inside him and spilling out like a bursting dam. It's All Might. He whisper-screamed, he's really here. Yeah, so? We've had class with him like 5 times already. Bando reminded. Izuku shook his head. That's different. He argued, this is rescue training. He's gonna teach us how to save people. He eagerly looked towards his hero, only to softly frown in confusion as All Might subtly made some weird gestures to Vlad King and 13, who had gathered in a circle to discuss something. Izuku didn't know what that one finger All Might put up meant, but based on the perturbed look on Vlad King's face it wasn't anything good. Suddenly, 13 turned towards the class, her helmet shining brightly under the lights of the USJ. Where are my manners? She began, I am the space hero, 13, but most of you probably knew that already. I'm happy to welcome you all to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or the USJ for short. She took a look out across the gathered students. I know you're all likely raring to get right into it, but please let me say one thing before we begin. Or 2, or 3, or, well, no matter. As you may or may not know, she continued, my quirk is called Black Hole, and the name speaks for itself. It can attract and destroy any and all matter SCKED into it, including people. The class collectively SCKED in a breath. I've used it to save many people, she said fondly, as if reminiscing on all those she has helped, but it could also be used to easily kill or harm others. In our society, quirks are heavily monitored and restricted, but don't forget how easy it is to slip up and make a mistake you can't take back. Everyone was quiet, clearly unnerved by the implications of 13's speech. For his part, Izuku could only think back on all the times Bakugou had used him as quirk practice, burns that never left, the smell of nitroglycerin, a pool of blood at the bottom of an alley. Izuku shuddered, breath shaky. He shouldn't think about that. He couldn't. But that is why you are all gathered here today, 13 finished, to learn how to control your power and use it to help others. Thank you for listening. The students clapped politely along as 13 bowed, her little speech doing wonders for everyone's understanding of the power they possessed. And then the lights flickered. Just like that, a group of people began to appear in front of the fountain in the middle of the USJ. They seemingly appeared from nowhere, a dark cloud had formed around the fountain, and there were dozens, if not hundreds, walking through it into the center of the USJ. And they just kept coming. Ken-sensei? Kendo asked, is this a part of the training? All Might had a dark look on his face, eyes shadowed by his hair as he stared down into the plaza. No, young Kendo. This was not supposed to happen. One of the villains stepped forward ahead of the rest, with disembodied hands covering his body. He had blue hair and a black jumpsuit, but beyond that there was too much distance between them to discern any other details. 13, Vlad King, and All Might, huh? The armed figure said, looks like our info was right on. Lovely. All Might stepped forward confidently, a beacon of hope for the students as he confronted the army of villains. So it was you lot who were behind the trespassing at the school last week? I'd applaud the bravery you showed if it weren't for the audacity you have to show up here. The hand-covered man, who seemed to be in charge, was content to let the rest of the villains slowly march forwards as he stayed back. Beside him, a behemoth of a man stood wearing nothing but a pair of shorts with an exposed brain. It looked like it wasn't even breathing. Izuku nearly lost his breakfast at the sight of that thing. The massive warp gate? Cloud? Whatever it was, it slowly shrunk back into itself, reforming into a smaller version of itself with narrow, yellow eyes. The blue-haired man cackled. "Oh, shut up. You may be the symbol of peace, but today Japan will learn what it's like to lose a legend. Nomu, kill him." In less than an instant the man behind the ringleader leapt into action, literally. The concrete beneath his feet cracked and broke underneath the force of his jump, arms pulled back as he prepared to slam into. All Might launched himself into the air to catch Nomu midair, stunning it briefly, long enough for him to reposition and launch it into the army of villains beneath them. His impact sent shockwaves through the enemy lines, but it was barely a second before Nomu pulled himself up and jumped right back up at the falling All Might. It caught the hero by surprise, and would have taken his head off if it weren't for All Might's superb reaction time, drilled into him by countless years of service. "Vlad King, with me," All Might ordered, his tone leaving zero room for argument. 13, get the students out of here. Vlad King nodded and immediately leapt into the fray, swinging a wall of blood out and catching a handful of villains off guard, slamming them into the concrete painfully. "Let's go!" 13 barked, a far cry from her peaceful tone from earlier. "We need to leave." Wait. Komori cried, even as they started to run towards the entrance. "See, can we really leave All Might and Kan-sensei behind?" 13 shook her head. "You all are far more important. They can handle themselves, they are heroes. You are children." Kamakiri sneered, but held his tongue as he ran. By the looks of things, he'd love nothing more than to go back and help All Might and Vlad King. Around 100 meters before they reached the entrance, a dark mist appeared from the ground, reforming into the same tall cloud it had been behind the hand-covered man. "Nice to meet you," it began, rather politely for a villain. "All things considered, we are the League of Villains. It may be presumptuous of us, but we have invited ourselves to the home of heroes, UA High School, in order to have All Might, the symbol of peace, take his last breath. Unfortunately, I am not allowed to let you leave." 13 quickly uncapped one of her fingers, ready and willing to either kill or force the mist to move out of the way, clearing their escape, but had to stop herself as Kamakiri, Tetsu, and Aways rushed forward to attack it. "Stop!" she ordered, but it was too late. A small explosion went off, but Izuku wasn't exactly sure why. A plume of smoke erupted from the center of the conflict, washing over all of them. "Did you consider that you'd get beaten by us before you did it?" Tetsu taunted, sneering up at the clouded form of the villain. The smoke cleared, and all three of them froze. Untouched, the villain stared down at them as though it was disappointed. "Oh dear, that's dangerous," it commented. "If that had hit me, it might have killed me. Quite hostile for heroes in training, no." "No!" 13 shouted, "Move out of the way, you three." It was too late. The misty man briefly compressed itself, revealing a metallic brace around its neck before shooting out and wrapping around the class and 13. "My job is to scatter you all," it explained, "and let our allies kill you. Terribly sorry for the inconvenience." Izuku barely had a moment to react before the mist wrapped around him fully, whisking him away to who knows where. Izuku landed on his back painfully, all the air in his lungs leaving him briefly. He didn't have time to rest, though. He pulled himself up just in time to see a villain with a body covered in orange rocks charging at him, a nasty smirk on his face. He flinched, already accepting his fate, but nothing happened. After a moment he opened his eyes, just in time to see the ground beneath the villain liquefy. He stumbled for a moment before slipping forward, but instead of hitting the ground, it looked like his chin hit nothing? Right before the villain would have hit the ground, he froze mid-fall as though the air itself had solidified and clocked him in the chin. With the villain out cold from that hit, Izuku was given a moment to think. His eyes darted behind him to see Hananuki and Tsuburaba, both looking at him worriedly. "You good, Midoriya-kun?" Tsuburaba questioned, letting the small amount of control over the air he was holding go. "That was a rough fall." Izuku nodded. "Why yeah, I'm alright. Thanks, Tsuburaba-san." "As nice as it is to see you're okay, Midoriya-san," Hananuki interrupted, "we've got bigger issues currently." Izuku looked around, and sure enough, there were a few bigger problems. Namely, a few dozen villains circling around them, all eager to tear the three boys apart. He gulped and hurried over to Tsuburaba and Hananuki's side, all standing back to back against each other as the villains slowly crept closer. "Got a plan, Midoriya-kun?" Tsuburaba whispered, "We kinda need one, and that seems to be your specialty. Gee, give me a second." Izuku hurriedly responded, brain already running a mile a second. What exactly are your quirks again? Be quick, please, Hananuki replied, whispering, but my quirk is called softening. It allows me to soften any non-living thing I touch in a manner similar to quicksand. Mine is solid air. Tsuburaba hissed quietly, it lets me solidify any air I breathe out, and I can make shapes and stuff out of it that can be stood on. They're also soundproof. Izuku nodded, noting their quirks and rapidly beginning to formulate a plan. From the looks of things, they were certainly in the landslide zone. The ground was slightly shaky, and their backs were to a sheer cliffside, making escape from the villains practically impossible. Why would the warp villain send Tsuburaba and Hananuki, two of the students with the best control over terrain in their class, to an area focused on a lack of mobility? It was probably where they would have the best chance of survival, after all. Guys? Tsuburaba whispered after a few seconds had passed, why aren't the villains, attacking us? Izuku froze. It's because they don't know our quirks. They're afraid of what we could do to them. Hananuki gave him a weird look. They were able to figure out when we'd be here, and they don't know our quirks. If they did, Izuku responded coolly, they'd be attacking us right now, attempting to break down an air barrier Tsuburaba had set up to protect us. How'd you know I was thinking about doing that? Tsuburaba asked, head tilted to the side. Izuku ignored him, more focused on the sudden shaking of the ground as the terrain from above them began to send small rocks down upon all of them. If a big enough landslide occurred, and they could somehow protect themselves. I have a plan. Izuku whisper-shouted, briefly causing all of the slowly encroaching villains to pause. Hananuki-san, does the stuff you soften retain its original shape once you remove your control over it? How much can you control at once? Hananuki shrugged. If I let it rest and settle, it will. Otherwise it'll stay in whatever form it is when I let it go. As for my limit, I can stretch my control pretty far, but not much further than a few rows of those villains. Izuku took a deep breath. Okay. Soften up the cliff behind us. Hananuki actually did a double take at that. Are you insane? He questioned, I'll kill all of us. At that statement, the villains took a collective step back, seemingly valuing their lives more than a few dead kids. Izuku covered his mouth for this next part, unwilling to let any information about their plan loose to the villains. Not if Tsuburaba makes air platforms for us to stand on. We'll wash away the villains, but we can ride out the landslide safely. Izuku hid his smile as he watched their eyes widen in realization. Yeah, Tsuburaba muttered, I can do that. Tsuburaba looked out towards the group of villains, and then back to the cliffside. I don't love this plan, he mumbled, but we don't have anything better. Let's do this. On my call, Izuku whispered, slowly raising his voice as he began counting down. 3, 2, 1, now. On his call, Hananuki reached back and shoved his hand into the cliffside. A torrent of dirt and stone began to fall down, even as he pushed himself off the side and back towards Izuku and Tsuburaba. In a few seconds the dirt and pebbles turned into earth and boulders, and soon enough the entire cliffside was coming down on top of them. Run! One of the villains shouted, but it was too late for them. Earth and mud swallowed them whole as it came tumbling down, a fate Izuku and his classmates only escaped by jumping off the side of the cliff and landing on a platform of solid air Tsuburaba had constructed for them. Holy shit, Hananuki gasped, laying flat against the invisible platform, I can't believe that worked. Tsuburaba nodded in agreement, unable to speak as he attempted to hold his breath and maintain the platform as long as possible. As the landslide rushed below them for longer and longer, Tsuburaba's face slowly turned redder and redder, the strain of holding up the platform for so long taking a toll on his lungs. Izuku and Hananuki shared a worried look, but were unable to do anything except hope that the landslide slowed down enough that they weren't swept away once their platform ceased to exist. With a gasp Tsuburaba finally took a breath, and the platform beneath them immediately broke apart and dropped the trio into the, thankfully mostly stopped, landslide. Izuku grit his teeth as he fell a few feet onto his back again, but was otherwise worse for wear. Similarly, Hananuki was alright, grunting as he liquefied the ground beneath him to form a small pool of quick mud to land in. Tsuburaba wasn't as lucky as the two of them, apparently. Izuku and Hananuki rushed to their classmate's side, watching as Tsuburaba gripped his left shoulder painfully, teeth grit. Are you alright, Tsuburaba-san? Hananuki questioned, what happened? I landed on my arm the wrong way, Tsuburaba hissed, it hurts like hell, I think it's broken. How exactly did you land? Izuku probed, and have you had a broken arm before? Tsuburaba winced as he gingerly touched his elbow, giving out a muffled groan as he found the source of the pain. I landed hand first, with my arm extended, he explained, I felt something in my elbow crack. And yeah, I broke my arm a few years ago testing out my quirk, so what? Izuku's stomach churned as he kneeled down to Tsuburaba's level, already bracing himself for the incoming pain. He hated broken bones. Hold still, Izuku whispered gently, taking one of his gloves off as he began to roll up Tsuburaba's sleeve. Tsuburaba gave him a weird look through his wincing. What are you doing, dude? Izuku gave him a pleading look, eyes full of desperation and pain. Please don't question me. Just don't move your arm and don't freak out. And with that, Izuku reached out and grabbed Tsuburaba's broken arm with his one ungloved hand. Izuku thought he could handle the pain this time. He had gone through this so many times before. What was one measly broken arm compared to everything else he'd taken on? He thought wrong. Tsuburaba's arm must have really been broken, as Izuku's right hand glowed a soft orange, spreading the light across Tsuburaba's arm. His left immediately began to crack and break. He wished he had a third hand to muffle his gasps of pain. It was over in a few seconds, but to Izuku it was nearly eternity. The orange light coating the inside of his hand died out once the transfer was complete, Izuku staggering jerkily up to his feet as he now bore Tsuburaba's broken arm. What just happened? Tsuburaba wondered, unaware of Izuku's inner turmoil. My arm feels fine now. Izuku nodded numbly. Gee good, he wheezed, that's what should have happened. Did you heal his arm, Midoriya-san? Hananuki asked, eyes wide as he watched Tsuburaba pull himself up with no issue. Is your quirk simply to heal others? Izuku's left arm laid limp against his side as he merely nodded. More or less, yeah. Of course, that wasn't true at all, but it wasn't like Hananuki and Tsuburaba could see Izuku's arm through his costume and tell that it was now completely shattered the way Tsuburaba's was. What an awesome quirk! Tsuburaba exclaimed, throwing his arms out wide. Why didn't you tell everyone you had a healing quirk sooner? Izuku shrugged his one good arm. It never came up. Hananuki looked around the remains of the landslide zone cautiously, as if more villains were waiting in the shadows. What do we do now? Go back to the entrance. Izuku grunted, see if anyone made it out and contacted the school. If they haven't, it's up to you guys to do so. What about you? Tsuburaba questioned, it doesn't sound like you're including yourself with us there. Izuku shook his head. I have to go and see if anyone else needs help. You sure, Midoriya-san? Hananuki asked, you don't look too hot. I'm fine, he insisted, healing someone just takes a lot out of me sometimes. If the others are hurt, it's my job to help them. Tsuburaba shrugged. If you're positive. Stay safe, yeah? Izuku nodded, lying through his teeth as his classmates quickly hurried back towards the entrance stairs. He just hoped that he wouldn't find any more injuries on the same level as Tsuburaba's. Knowing the situation his classmates were in, he doubted it. Izuku hurried through the conflagration zone, his legs carrying them as fast as he could through the destroyed false city and flames. The taste of ash in his mouth nearly made him puke, an unfortunate side effect of using his quirk. He had been through the mountain zone, having found an unharmed Kodai and Nirenjiki, as well as Tsunotori with a sprained ankle that he immediately healed before hurrying on his way. Putting any weight on it scked massively, but he wasn't about to give up and head back towards the entrance when his classmates were out here fighting for their lives. He hoped that help came soon. Izuku wondered if All Might had defeated the large villain he had been fighting. Nomu, was it? It seemed to be able to withstand at least a few of All Might's attacks, which was worrying, and the exposed brain certainly would become a mainstay in his nightmares. Normally he wouldn't have been worried. It was All Might for God's sake, and he never lost to anybody. He was the strongest hero in the world and the symbol of peace for a reason, but the thought that the villains had come here specifically to kill him had Izuku worried. If they came to the USJ to kill All Might, it meant they had a plan to do so and a belief that they would succeed. Izuku prayed that their plan failed. A split sidewalk caused Izuku to stumble, and with his next step being onto his bad ankle he fell to the ground with a whimper. He really hated his quirk sometimes. Izuku went so long in his life without a quirk, and once he finally got one it was the worst possible quirk a hero could have. Transfer. The ability to transfer another person's injuries to himself. Fat load it would do for him as a hero in the field. What was he gonna do, kill himself in the middle of a fight with a villain by healing a bystander? A scream from nearby immediately cut through his thoughts, all self-loathing discarded the moment he heard it. It had come from near the center of the city, where the fire was burning the largest, and Izuku hauled himself to his feet without a second thought even as his ankle screamed in protest. He didn't like what he found. Shiozaki stood in front of a downed Kendo, many tendrils of her hair alight with flame as she ensnared the remaining villains and slammed them down into the pavement. Hard. There was a good chance a few of those villains didn't get up for a while. There were dozens of bodies surrounding the two, but Izuku paid them no attention as he hurried towards the girls. The moment Shiozaki had finished off the last villains, she collapsed to the ground, immediately beginning to fret over Kendo, who wasn't responding. Sheet. What happened? Izuku shouted, coughing from the smoke he had been inhaling the whole way here. Shiozaki looked up in shock, eyes widening for a moment before she turned her full attention back to Kendo. Her hands were clasped around one of Kendo's own, trembling all the while. We were dropped here by that FF filth, Shiozaki whispered, into this blazing inferno. Alone and outnumbered. We fought as hard as we could, but Kendo. Shiozaki choked back a sob as she stared down at Kendo's unmoving body, her orange hair dirty and splayed out behind her. She took an attack that was meant for me, and dash. Izuku pushed Shiozaki aside, immediately focusing on Kendo's face. He shoved his fingers under her nose to check for an airflow, and nearly cried as he realized that she was still breathing. Where did she get hurt? Izuku urged, but the answer was right in front of him. A massive slice sat across Kendo's stomach, going from her right hip to just under the left side of her ribcage. Her costume hid most of the damage, but that did nothing to hide the amount of blood that was rushing out of the wound. This one was going to be ugly. Even so, Izuku didn't hesitate in bringing his hand to his mouth and using his teeth to rip off his glove. What in God's name are you doing? Shiozaki shrieked, watching in horror as Izuku shoved his hand against Kendo's stomach, only to gasp and go silent as that all-too-familiar orange light spread from his hand across Kendo's wound. Her wound closed quickly, much faster than it had taken for Tsuburaba's arm to heal, but all that meant for Izuku was that he had even less time to grit his teeth and brace himself as his stomach ripped open, letting out a strangled cry as he collapsed against the pavement. At least his costume didn't rip, sparing Shiozaki the sight of another gruesome injury. Shiozaki screamed. Kendo gasped, up and awake now that her wound had been removed. It took her a moment to reorient herself, but by then he was barely conscious. Izuku's only regret as the darkness embraced him was that he wasn't able to help more people. Izuku stumbled down the alley, hurrying to avoid any unwanted company. Today had not been a good day. Well, he hadn't been beaten up. That was a plus. What really hurt was Cats, Bakugou telling him to kill himself. It wasn't the first time one of his classmates had told him to do it, but it was the first time Bakugou had stooped so low. Despite it all, it still stung to no end to hear that from his former best friend. He pulled on his backpack straps tighter, quickening his pace. He really didn't want to get jumped on the way home. The manhole in front of him shuddered. Izuku instinctively took a step back, his nerves screaming at him to stay away from whatever that was. All of a sudden the manhole shot up into the air, a mass of green sludge quickly erupting out from the sewer. It locked eyes, the only human thing about the mass, besides its jagged mouth, with Izuku and grinned. A V-villain? He gasped. Well, it gurgled, what do we have here? A medium-sized invisibility cloak. It's my lucky day. Izuku tried to run, but he had zero chance to escape the monster. All it took was a single tendril of sludge to wrap around his foot, and just like that he was at the mercy of the villain. The sludge quickly began to wrap around him, attempting to shove itself down his throat. Don't worry, kid. It cackled, I'm only taking over your body. It'll only hurt for a few seconds, it'll be over soon. Izuku couldn't breathe. He desperately tried to claw at the sludge, fighting to do anything to stay alive, terror in his eyes. But it was too little, too late. Thanks, kid. You're my hero. And wasn't that just about the worst thing Izuku had ever heard? He kept trying to fight it, but it was hopeless. His chest was burning, his vision was narrowing, and he couldn't feel anything anymore. Was he really going to die like this? Have no fear, citizen. A voice boomed, reaching out to him through the darkness, for I am here. Sheet. The sludge villain shouted, if I'd only had another minute. Texas smash. As though a hurricane had swept through the alleyway, the sludge immediately blew apart under the force of the Texas smash. Izuku collapsed limply to the ground, gasping for any air that he could, until he began to vomit up sludge, bile, and his lunch. All in all, it wasn't a very nice time. Are you okay, young man? That voice asked again, closer this time. Whoever it was, they sure sounded familiar. Their frame cast a shadow over Izuku's entire body as he slowly looked up to meet the eyes of his hero. All Might. All Might had saved him. Izuku trembled, eyes widening to the size of saucers as he stared back at his idol, and more importantly, Japan's #1 hero and symbol of peace. All Might. All Might laughed. That's my name, all right. Glad to see you're coherent enough to recognize me. How are you holding up? Izuku tried to respond, pulling himself to his knees, but the only thing that came out was more puke. Right onto All Might's shoes. He froze, mortification at an all-time high. His trembling reached worrying levels as he realized what he just did. Izuku's breathing became staggered and quick. I am SSSSOSO-. All Might put a hand up to stop him. Izuku curled into himself, unwilling to hear the incoming admonishment. It is quite all right, young man, All Might said, voice surprisingly soft for someone so big as he placed a hand on Izuku's back. Just breathe. All Might handed him a brown paper bag to breathe into. Izuku didn't question where he got it, to calm himself, and after a few minutes his breathing finally returned to normal. Izuku gulped and immediately regretted it, the sour taste of vomit and the remaining sludge in his mouth nearly making him hurl again. I am so sorry about that, All Might, I mean sir, I mean dash. Do not worry young man. All Might interrupted, it is what heroes do. Izuku nodded quietly, not minding being interrupted by his favorite person in the world. Sorry. All Might just laughed again. May I have your name, young man? All Might asked. You Midoriya Izuku, sir, Izuku replied, before his eyes widened in alarm. Wait. What happened to the villain? All Might's grin grew even larger somehow, and he held up a 2-liter bottle of soda filled with sludge and a pair of eyes. I happened to be in the middle of shopping before I stumbled across this fiend. It turned out to work out quite well, if I do say so myself. Apologies are in order for taking so long to arrive. I do not have the sewer systems as memorized as I would have liked. Izuku nodded along dumbly, not daring to question All Might. He was still 50-50 on this being real or him having died and gone to heaven. It's no problem, sir. Thank you for saving me. Of course. Now, do you have someone I can call for you to pick you up? All Might questioned, or perhaps you would like to visit the hospital for evaluation. Izuku shook his head. And no, I think I'm alright, sir. Thank you. I only live a few blocks away. If you believe yourself to be alright young Midoriya, then I suppose I must trust your judgment. All Might agreed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get this. Fiend dash. Wait. Izuku shouted, cutting off All Might. All Might raised an eyebrow, and despite his grin not leaving his face Izuku suddenly felt like he'd made a mistake. Changed your mind about the hospital trip? Izuku shook his head fervently. And no, I think I am okay, he muttered, straightening his posture. I just wanted to, no, I need to ask you something. All Might shrugged, liking the spunk the small boy was suddenly showing. I've got some time to kill, shoot. Izuku took a deep, shaky breath. It was now or never. I know I'm not strong like you, he admitted bitterly, glaring down at his own red shoes, or brave like you, or as fast, or cool, but you've always inspired me. Ever since I was a toddler, I wanted to be just like you. My quirk isn't useful for heroics, and no one believes in me, but I need to hear it from you. Izuku looked directly into All Might's eyes, the last dredges of his determination blazing to life in his eyes. Can I become a hero, just like you? For all the times Izuku had seen his hero, he had never seen him look surprised. Until now. A hero just like me, huh? All Might repeated airily, sitting down on the grimy curb. Kid, take a seat. Izuku did as instructed, unwilling to do anything less than All Might's exact orders, and all of a sudden he was staring at nothing alongside the number one hero. Why do you want to be a hero, young Midoriya? All Might asked, and be honest. Izuku knew the answer in his heart immediately, but still took a moment to think about it. I'll admit, part of my wanting to be a hero is because everybody has always told me I couldn't. I want to be a hero to prove them wrong, but that's not the real reason. Izuku sighed, eyes downcast. When I was a kid, I saw this video of you. It was your hero debut in the US, I think. There was a burning building, and everybody was so scared until you showed up. Izuku smiled at the memory. You said, I am here, and all of a sudden you were just everywhere, saving people by the dozens with every trip into the building. You had a smile that made everyone who saw it feel safe, and that was when I realized I wanted to be like you. I wanted to make people feel safe with just a smile, and save everybody. All Might nodded. A fine reason, young Midoriya. There are not many as altruistic as you in the world. I fear many would rather become heroes for glory or fortune. So why, as you say, does nobody believe in you? Izuku tensed up involuntarily, a slew of memories dragged to the forefront of his mind. He forced out an awkward laugh. How much time do you have? All Might smirked. As long as it takes to hear you out, young Midoriya. Well, Izuku began, as you can probably tell, I'm not exactly the strongest, or brightest, or bravest, or most outgoing person in the world, but those are just small potatoes compared to the real reason. Izuku shuddered, ready to pour his heart out to his hero. He didn't think about what he'd do if All Might rejected his pleas. He couldn't. My quirk, Izuku trailed off, it came in late. Really late. All my life I was considered a quirkless, worthless Deku, unable to do anything right. I was mocked as is, and wanting to be a hero just made it so much worse. I got laughed at in class today just for wanting to apply TTUA. He sniffled, pathetically wiping his eyes as he spilt his heart out to All Might. God, how lame could he possibly be? He gets saved by All Might and all he can do is puke on his shoes and cry in front of his hero. Izuku was such an idiot. For the first time he could remember, All Might frowned. I'm sorry you had to go through that, young Midoriya, he said solemnly. I don't remember quirklessness being treated so harshly when I was your age. It must have taken a lot to stay so true to your dreams. But I have to ask, what is your quirk? Izuku sked in a breath. He still hadn't told anyone about his quirk, and he certainly didn't think All Might would be the first person to hear about it. Here goes nothing. I call it transfer, he muttered. It allows me to, take a person's injuries and transfer them to my body, healing them in the process but leaving me with their injury. All I need is to touch them with my hand to do so, but it works quicker if I'm touching their injury. It only came in about a year ago, so most people don't exactly know I have it. Toshinori was suddenly very glad that this kid didn't know about his injuries. He could not imagine a universe he wouldn't at least offer to heal his wounds. All Might was quiet for a moment, pondering his words. I see, he muttered, voice low enough Izuku nearly missed it. Chio would have a field day with him. Sir? Izuku prodded, shaking All Might out of his thoughts. He coughed into his fist. Sorry about that, just lost in my own head. I have one last question for you, young Midoriya. Izuku straightened up. Anything, sir? All Might chuckled. Thought so. Well, it's relatively simple. How badly do you want to be a hero? Izuku answered with zero hesitation. More than anything in the world. All Might laughed. And then he stood up, clapped him on the back, and smiled. Then I suppose there is nothing I can say other than this. Izuku's heart sped up, the waterworks already beginning to burst. All Might pointed down at him. At the scrawny, filthy, pathetic nerd with dreams of grandeur and a heart bigger than Japan. And he smiled. Young Midoriya, All Might declared, you can become a hero. I believe in you. Izuku burst into tears. He had waited so long long just to hear those words. And All Might was the one to tell him. Thank you, All Might. Izuku cried, trying to hide his tears from the hero. Why you don't know how much this means to me. I'll make you proud. I'll become a hero, just like you. I'm sure you will, All Might said coolly, and call me Yagi. Toshinori Yagi. Izuku blinked away some of his tears, looking up at All Might in confusion. What? My real name, All Might admitted, but let's keep that between us, K? Izuku nodded so quickly he thought his head would fly off. Oh of course, sir, why Yagi-san? All Might started to laugh again, but cut it off quickly, almost like there was an unseen timer going off in his head. I'd love to stay and talk more, but duty calls. I'm sure I'll see you at UA in 10 months, winning the sports festival. Oh of course sir. Izuku agreed, but, could I ask you for one more favor? All Might nodded, despite his rapidly approaching time limit. He could do one more thing for this boy. Izuku sheepishly pulled out his latest notebook. His burnt, soggy, sludge-covered notebook that Bakugou had haphazardly thrown out the window a few minutes ago. It already felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Could you sign my notebook, Yagi-san? Izuku asked shyly. All Might burst into laughter, graciously accepting the pen Izuku had offered him. Yeah, something told him he'd be seeing young Midoriya a lot more in the future. Quite the interesting prospects we have this year, no? Nizu prodded, so many different techniques on display. Information gathering to understand the situation, mobility on a scale unseen in recent years, the discernment to stay calm under the highest pressure, and pure combat ability. What a show they're putting on for us. Toshinori nodded along absent-mindedly, slowly scrolling through screens until he found something interesting. He didn't have much luck. Most of the examinees, while tough, weren't really doing much to stand out to him. Well, that wasn't quite true. There was a certain green-haired boy All Might was keeping a subtle eye on while he observed the other students. Running around wildly, clearly focused on trying to gather points, yet abandoning all attempts at passing the exam the moment he passed an injured competitor. He looked a lot better than he did 10 months ago. And was that some muscle underneath that tracksuit? Toshinori was impressed by the kid's determination, if nothing else. Oh? Kayama gasped, a teasing smile on her face. Somebody catch your eye, All Might? Toshinori shrugged, keeping a neutral face even as Nizu helpfully made the screen observing Izuku cover the entire interface. Just interested in this examinee, going around and helping his competition instead of focusing on gathering points. Midoriya was clearly faltering. Bruises and whelps covered his body, and there was a fair amount of blood on him, but he trucked on regardless, healing anyone and everyone who needed it and doing whatever he could for those in a bind. Nizu hummed, tapping away at some unseen keyboard. Midoriya Izuku, examinee #middle school, Aldera Junior High. Quirk, oh ho! Nizu pulled up the small file he had been looking at onto the main screen as well, placing the file and the screen side by side. Midoriya's smiling face greeted the staff, even with how forced the smile looked, causing Kayama to coo and Toshinori to smile, but the real kicker was located in the information. Quirk, N.A. That can't be right, Ken muttered, that boy definitely has a quirk. Just look. Sure enough, Midoriya stumbled upon another examinee and began to fret over them. They had blonde hair and were holding their stomach tightly, clearly in pain, but after one touch from Midoriya, and a glowing orange hand, they were as good as new. The boy bid Midoriya farewell, and just barely missed him collapsing back against the wall in pain. He held his stomach gingerly for a few moments before pulling himself back up, determined to get some points. Well, Nizu muttered, mouth a thin line, this file was last updated 2 years ago. Perhaps he is simply a late bloomer. Mutterings ran through the staff, and Nizu shared a discreet look with him. For his part, Toshinori simply shook his head. There was no way the two were related. He had crushed All for One skull between his own 2 hands, after all. Do not allow him into the hero course. Toshinori turned towards the intruding voice, but he immediately knew who it was. Why not, Aizawa? Ken grunted, eyes not leaving the screen. What good would he do as a hero? Aizawa shot back. No self-control, goes out of his way to help civilians at the cost of himself. No apparent countermeasures to healing others at his own expense, and doesn't even have his quirk registered. What good would he be in the field? Cannon fodder? Getting himself and a civilian that he stops to help killed? Ken scoffed. Isn't that why we're here, to guide and mold the next generation of heroes? We're teachers, for Christ's sake. Aizawa rolled his eyes. I don't care what you do with him, Kansas. I'm not going to force myself to go to another poor sap's funeral because he wasn't hero material. Spare me the sob story. Put him in my class, and I'll expel him. Simple as that. Ken was quiet, but there was no doubt that 1.5 million thoughts were running through his head. All Might assumed only half of them revolved around young Midoriya, the others likely focused on strangling Aizawa. He didn't blame him. Now, Nizu tutade, that's enough of that. I think it's time to see what these prospects are truly made of. All Might, if you do the honors. Toshinori nodded, eagerly pressing the big red button. Here was young Midoriya's chance, he hoped the boy didn't disappoint. And as the zero-pointer erupted from the confines of the city, Toshinori could only watch proudly as the scrawny boy he met 10 months ago went above and beyond to save a complete stranger. He took a glance at Kansas. Sure enough, the man was hooked. Good. It looked like he'd be seeing a lot of young Midoriya from here on out. Nizu clapped his paws together, immediately silencing any and all side conversations that had been going on. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, he said softly. I hope I don't take up too much of your time today. I'm sure you all know why you're here. No responses. Good. They knew when Nizu was in business mode by now, and knew better than to interrupt. Does anybody have any questions before we begin? Nizu asked. Ken's hand shot up. Unsurprising. Midoriya-kun is in stable condition, he offered. Recovery girl is looking over him as we speak. Kuro-san is also recovering well. Ken nodded tightly in return, unable to trust his voice. Nizu-san, Kayama began slowly, what exactly happened at the USJ? Aizawa and Yamada both leaned forward in their seats, intrigued. Of course. We aren't 100% on the details, Nizu admitted, smile falling into a terse line, but the timeline of events seems to flow this way. This League of Villains, as they call themselves, orchestrated the press break-in 2 weeks ago and used it as a distraction to sneak into the school and steal an itinerary for Class 1B, with the intention to use it to find a way to isolate and kill All Might. They chose Class 1B's field trip to the USJ as their opportunity to strike, and brought an army of lower-class villains with them to achieve that goal. Alongside the cannon fodder they had one Nomu, a bioengineered creature meant to slay All Might, and Kurogyri, a warper that served as their entrance and escape from the USJ. Nomu was recovered and is being dissected as we speak, and Kurogyri and the ringleader, Shigaraki, were the only 2 able to escape. What happened to Anan and Midoriya-kun, though? Yamada insisted. Patience, Nizu said, putting a hand up to silence his subordinate. Kuro-san was injured in a fight with Kurogyri, as he was successfully able to warp one of her black holes directly behind her, nearly destroying her suit. As for Midoriya-kun, that is what we are less sure of. From the testimony of Hananuki-kun, Tsuburaba-kun, Tsunatori-san, and Shiozaki-san, We can gather that he wound up in the landslide zone, helped to incapacitate the villains present, and then went on a spree to heal any wounded classmates he found. Can SCKED in a harsh breath. Aizawa looked vindicated. Time to nip that in the bud. I've read the reports from Shuzenji-san, Nizu said simply, they aren't pretty. We likely would have lost a student if it were not for Midoriya-kun, as the injury he transferred from Kendo-san likely would have killed. She is not sure how Midoriya-kun survived, but the working theory is that his quirk grants him some form of advanced durability or regeneration that we don't know about yet. It's something we'll have to ask him about when he wakes up. So what do you want us to do? Aizawa asked lazily. Nizu shrugged. Be vigilant. Sweeping changes are already being put in place in lieu of the sports festival's arrival, but it will not hurt to stay on our toes. With that, the door opened. You are dismissed. All Might, Kan-san, if you could hang back a moment? Yagi gave him a look, but that did not deter Nizu. This was simply the safest course of action. Once everybody evacuated the room, the door slammed itself shut once more. What's this about? Kan questioned, I've got a lot on my plate at the moment. Yagi sighed. Please, we do not need to discuss this, Nizu. I've told you already, there is no chance the two are connected. Nizu's tone was clipped. I would agree, but what about the Nomu? We both know only one person could be behind that. Kan raised an eyebrow. You two think you know who's behind that whole multiple quirks thing? Perhaps, Nizu admitted, despite the clear frown on Yagi's face. Pray tell, have you ever heard of the boogeyman? The next few days went by in a blur. Reporters hid around every corner, eager to squeeze any drops of information they could out of any poor UA student that they stumbled across. Itsuka was lucky. Her family didn't let her out of their sight, or the house, all weekend, which meant she didn't have to deal with that. She was glad they didn't learn about what had truly happened at the USJ. They might not let her return to UA at that rate. Truthfully, she didn't remember much past the initial confrontation. She and Ibra were stuck together in the conflagration zone, desperately fighting for their lives and more for what felt like an eternity. Then there was a glint of steel, her jumping in front of Ibra, and pain. She didn't know how long she was out for. All she knew was that when she woke up, Ibra was practically catatonic, freaking out over her and Midoriya, who had somehow shown up out of nowhere and was bleeding out. Her injury was gone, though, so that was nice. Until Ibra told her exactly where her injury had went. After that everything became a blur. She remembered All Might showing up and taking Midoriya away, and for the first time since their first day with him the man wasn't smiling. She remembered talking to the paramedics for a while, and then the police, but things only smoothed out after she got home. Itsuka really hoped Midoriya was okay. She didn't claim to know him that well, they had only spoken a handful of times outside of their mandatory class representative meetings, but he was very kind and soft-spoken. He was a good person. But that pit of dread that had been slowly building up in her gut ever since that day was beginning to form a black hole with each passing moment he didn't show up for homeroom. Then the bell rang, and there was still no sign of Midoriya. That really effed with her. Finally, eventually, mercifully, Kan-sensei showed up. He didn't look too good. Hello, everyone, he said, voice muted, I am glad to see you are all okay. Sensei, Ibra croaked pitifully, before Kan-sensei realized his mistake. He sighed, putting his hand up to silence her. That was a poor choice of words. I am sorry. He looked towards the lone empty desk in the back corner of the room, a frown set upon his features. Midoriya-kun is, in recovery. We don't know when he will be ready to attend classes again, but you will all be the first to know. Your English PRD is cancelled for today, Kan-sensei continued, as I wanted to give you some time to allow me to answer any questions you may have. Just like that, the class erupted, a cacophony of voices drowning out the PRGNNT silence that had preceded it. From the sound of things, most people were trying to figure out what had happened to Midoriya. Itsuka was quiet. Only one question floated around in her head, and Kan-sensei certainly couldn't answer it for her. Why did Midoriya lay down his life for her? She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the answer, whatever it may be. Recovery Girl's office was quiet. Empty, too. Except for one person, laying still in the sole-occupied bed. Izuku had been sleeping for a while. His injuries had been extensive. With a jolt, his eyes shot open. The sudden light made him wince, even if it was muted by the fact that it was nearly dark out. Only the vibrant orange of the sunset provided any light for him. Izuku gulped at the dark outline of several figures standing outside the door to Recovery Girl's office. Whatever happened to him now, Izuku was sure that things had changed as a result of his actions at the USJ. He could only hope it was for the better. Knowing his history, he doubted it. Out of all the people Izuku expected to see after waking up, a police detective, his homeroom teacher, and recovery girl were at the top of his list. All Might was not. "Hello, Midoriya-kun," recovery girl said gently, "how are you feeling? You gave us quite the fright, dearie." Izuku winced. Sorry." He winced again at the sound of his voice, raspy and gritty after having gone without water for what was likely at least a few days. "No need to apologize," recovery girl tooted, "what you did was very brave. Even most pros wouldn't be willing to do what you did." He blushed, somewhat uncomfortable with the praise. Izuku knew it wasn't something he should be feeling too good about, being willing to get seriously hurt just so others would be alright, but it wasn't exactly like he had any other redeeming qualities. It did feel nice to see All Might nod in agreement from behind her, though his ever-present grin was a tad unnerving given the situation. Recovery girl walked up to his bedside, lowering her voice so that the others would have to strain to make out what she was saying. "How are your injuries?" she whispered. "The strike Kendo received would have killed her, and should have killed you." Izuku cringed at the news, her tone doing nothing to lessen the blow of the revelation. Even if he had sort of expected it given what he had seen back at the USJ, it wasn't exactly a comforting thought that he should have been dead. But it was better him than one of his classmates. If he had a choice, Izuku would do it all again in a heartbeat to keep them safe. They hadn't immediately hated him, which meant they were some of the kindest people he'd ever met. He even called some of them his friends. He wondered if they would treat him the same way if they knew about how he used to be quirkless. My arm still hurts," he admitted bashfully. "As for my torso, I can't really tell unless I get up and start walking around." Recovery girl nodded at the information before stepping back and giving him some more breathing room. "That's about what I expected. Considering what happened after the entrance exam, it should come as no surprise to you that my quirk still doesn't react well with yours. The healing will have to be done by your body alone, although based on what we've seen while you were unconscious it will be a quicker recovery than an average human." Izuku nodded in return. "I figured." With that, recovery girl stepped back, turning towards her little computer to check on something or other. It was probably related to him, and Izuku suddenly had the feeling that he'd be the center of many a headache for the youthful heroine. The detective stepped forward next, All Might and Vlad King stepping in line behind. The man was clearly exhausted, and gave Izuku a kind smile with tired eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow that had certainly been left unattended for days. "Hi there, Midoriya-kun," the man greeted. "I'm Detective Tsukachi of the Mizudafu Police Department. I just need to ask you a few questions about what happened, if that's okay." He just nodded, not quite trusting his voice yet underneath the stares of All Might, Vlad King, and the detective. "Well, how about we start off at the beginning?" Tsukachi prodded, pulling out a notepad. "We've gotten the gist of things from your classmates, but I'd still like to hear what happened in your words. Where did the warp villain, Kurojairi, send you?" "The landslide zone," Izuku confirmed, causing the detective to nod and write something down on his notepad. Tsuburaba-san and Hananuki-san were there with me. We figured out that the villains didn't know what our quirks were, since they hadn't attacked us, and that gave us time to come up with a plan." Tsukachi nodded. "To create a landslide, right? Wash away the villains?" "Something like that, yeah." He wrote down another few lines on his notepad before straightening up a tad. "That's in line with what your classmates told us," he informed Izuku, "but we're a little confused as to what happened afterwards." Izuku shrugged lamely. "Tsuburaba-san hurt his arm as we fell after avoiding the landslide, and I transferred it. I started running around to find anyone else who needed help, but only found Tsunatori-san, Kodai-san, and Nirenjiki-san in the mountain zone before I ran into the conflagration zone. I took Tsunatori-san's sprained ankle and then found Shiozaki-san and Kendo-san there and transferred her injury, then I passed out." "That's it?" Tsukachi asked. "Nothing in between then that we should know about?" "Tsukachi," Vlad King began, tone threatening. Izuku looked confused. "No? Is there supposed to be something?" Vlad King shook his head. "No. The detective is merely being thorough, right?" Tsukachi nodded. Yes. This all checks out. 2 questions though. Hananuki and Tsuburaba both told us that you said your quirk was a simple healing one. Can you explain why you lied to them?" He looked down at his lap. He muttered, "didn't think they'd react very well if they knew what my quirk did right after transferring Tsuburaba's broken arm. Didn't think they'd let me leave to go looking for anybody else, either." "Makes sense," he replied, "and as for the other one, why? Why did you not simply head for safety, and instead risk your well-being to go and aid your classmates?" Of course they would ask that. Izuku knew why he would do something like that. There were practically a dozen reasons why he had been so willing to throw himself onto the pyre for anybody and everybody in his class. Explaining it to other people, however, wasn't exactly the easiest thing in the world. He couldn't exactly go and say, well, their lives are more valuable than mine due to a variety of factors that I am not at liberty to share, now could he? All Might noticed the troubled look on his face. Now, Tsukachi-kun, he was merely exhibiting a desire to help those in need. Acting as a true hero should. Young Midoriya had the ability and urge to help his friends in danger, and so he acted on those desires. There is nothing wrong with putting the needs of others before your own, even if the risks inherent with young Midoriya's quirk leave something to be desired. Agreed. Vlad King nodded. We can criticize his actions all we want, but it would be quite hypocritical to do so, antithetical to the idea of a hero, even. There are some concerns with what happened, yes, but we can deal with this at a later time. Izuku got the strange feeling that they had forgotten he was listening to them. Tsukachi shrugged apologetically. Just doing my job. He spared Izuku one last glance as he turned to leave the room. Get well soon, kid. Hope you don't take it the wrong way when I say I hope we don't need to meet up again for a few years, yeah? Izuku blinked as the detective waved and quickly shut the door behind him, not really given the time to say his own goodbyes. Vlad King ran a hand through his hair, looking quite irritated, and All Might just sighed. Izuku felt rather small as he sat up in the cot while they expressed their exasperation. Vlad King looked very out of his depth as he opened and closed his mouth a few times, trying to figure out the right words to say. Sorry about him, he said after a minute, he's good at his job but he's very thorough. It's okay, Izuku said simply. Vlad King shook his head. No, it's not, he insisted, you and your classmates were through a traumatic experience, one that should not have happened and that we are responsible for. He could have had a little more tact. All Might interrupted, you know why he was like that. You're getting distracted. Vlad King sighed again. Yeah, I know, he grunted, just irritated. Izuku looked down at his hand solemnly. Was he mad at him? It wouldn't shock him. Midoriya-kun, Vlad King continued, look at me please. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest, alright? Izuku slowly raised his eyes to meet his teacher's. Instead of the angry or upset look he had expected, Vlad King's eyes were filled with concern? He almost didn't believe it. Did you know just how badly Kendo was hurt when you decided to use your quirk on her? He asked softly, something that contrasted greatly with his sharp features. Izuku shook his head slightly. I knew it was bad, he admitted, but I couldn't really gauge just how bad her wound was based on just what I saw. There wasn't a lot of time for me to act either, because I was pretty sure she was in shock. I didn't think it would leave me out for, 3 days, All Might added helpfully before his tone grew slightly more somber. I must apologize to you, young Midoriya. What? Izuku squeaked, what do you have to apologize to me for, sir? All Might frowned again. Well, as the years have gone on, I must admit that I am not as spry as I used to be. Even the symbol of peace is only a man, after all. Izuku blinked. But you're All Might. Even if you're getting, a little older, you're still the greatest hero ever. And why would you have to apologize to me for that? Patience, young Midoriya, All Might chuckled, but as I was saying, being a hero, at my age, it takes a little bit more out of me each year that goes by. When I applied to become a teacher at UA, I was expected to put my teaching career before my hero one, even if only temporarily. Unfortunately, in my hubris I foolishly thought I could do both. The morning of the USJ attack, I had spent a lot of my energy on simply fighting petty crime that I had passed on my way to work. Had I left it to the heroes who already had the situations under control, I would have been more prepared, more able to battle the villains who threatened the lives of you and your classmates. For this, I cannot apologize enough. Oh. Izuku didn't really know how to respond to his idol apologizing. It's okay, really. It's not like you could have known about this, you were just doing your job as the symbol of peace. Nobody else got hurt, right? Vlad King nodded. Aside from a few scrapes and bruises here and there, you and 13 were the only ones severely injured. Then it's okay. He tried, I'm fine now, so. All Might put up a hand to silence him. It worked extraordinarily well. You may have survived, young Midoriya, but you were severely injured in no small part due to my negligence. You may be fine now, yes, but what if you weren't? What if you were too slow to reach Kendo, and something worse happened? It is precisely because of what could have been that my actions were so unforgivable. His eyes hardened. It will not happen again. Even if Izuku wasn't the target of All Might's furious stare, he still gulped. It's still okay. Apology accepted. All Might chuckled. You are far too kind, young Midoriya. You have my sincerest thanks. He nodded back slowly, and All Might looked satisfied. His face took on a conflicted expression, as though he were struggling through a mental battle, but before Izuku could ask if he was okay, Vlad King began to talk again. So, Midoriya-kun, he began gruffly, I have some good news and bad news. Which would you like to hear first? Izuku made a face. He didn't know what he was about to hear, but he couldn't imagine it was anything good. Good news first, please. All right. Vlad King nodded. You've only missed one day of school, and your classmates were happy to compile the notes and homework you've missed for you. Your teachers are also very understanding, and you can have as much time as you need to catch up on your studies. Everyone was very worried about you. Izuku's face flushed. It was still strange to hear that people actually cared about him now. If Vlad King's words were accurate, he was going to be in for some awkward conversations whenever he returned back to class. And the bad news? He asked hesitantly. Vlad King frowned. Due to your injuries, he continued, you are going to be unable to participate in most of your foundational hero studies exercises for the foreseeable future, at least until your arm heals. Izuku winced slightly, but he had expected that. Is that it? His teacher shook his head. No. The sports festival was planned for next week, as you know, and despite many arguments, Principal Nizu decided to keep us on schedule and host it anyways. Oh. Izuku's small form began to tremble. I see. The sports festival. One of the most important events of the year for hero students, UA, and all of Japan. The chance that all hero students use to put themselves out there for the world, and more importantly, the hero agencies of Japan, to observe and hopefully find an interest in. And Izuku wasn't going to be able to compete. Because of course not. When would the universe choose not to F him over? Vlad King and All Might shared a look. Neither of them looked thrilled with his reaction, although there was a grim acceptance shared between the two heroes. You will still be receiving offers from UA-related hero agencies, Vlad King offered. Your situation will be explained to any and all hero agencies willing to hear us out, and can still give you offers at their discretion. Izuku sniffled pathetically. Oh okay. All Might thought he looked like a kicked puppy. No, that was too kind. He looked like a puppy that had been starved for weeks and left to die. I am so sorry, young Midoriya, All Might said again. Izuku really didn't feel like crying in front of All Might and his homeroom teacher, but if this continued for much longer he wouldn't have much of a choice in the matter. I want to go home. He whispered. Vlad King nodded solemnly. I understand. You just need to go through one last checkup with Recovery Girl, and you'll be free to go. He and All Might made for the door, with the blood hero turning around one last time to face him. We're here for you if you need anything, Midoriya-kun, he finished. Please remember that I meant what I said at the beginning of the school year. If you ever need anything, or just want to talk, I'm here for you. And with that, Izuku was alone again, aside from Recovery Girl, who gently poked and prodded at him to see how stable he was. He didn't bother to try and hide his tears anymore. At least she didn't comment on them. Izuku was really close to not going to school the next morning. His cast felt heavy on his arm, and the gauze around his torso, that he had to change daily, on Recovery Girl's orders, wasn't doing much to help things. Everything kind of felt pointless. Why should he bother? It wasn't like he could participate in the classes that actually mattered for his future, if he even had one, with how useless he was. He wasn't going to get a chance to do anything during the sports festival, either. What was UA going to do? Tell hero agencies that they had a student whose quirk was getting himself hurt? What a joke. He'd probably get laughed out of the room if any of those agencies tried to meet him. And what about his classmates? He remembered how freaked out Shiozaki had been when he had used his quirk on Kendo back at the USJ. Would the rest of them react in a similar manner? Probably. He was a freak through and through, and his quirk only solidified that. Sure, Bando and Fukudashi had accepted him and his quirk, but knowing what he could do and actually experiencing it were two different things. What if Shiozaki told them all about what he had done and everybody became weirded out by him? What if Hananuki and Tsuburaba realized he'd lied to their faces and resented him? What if? Izuku took a shuddering breath. There was no point in dwelling on the what-ifs. He'd done that enough in his life already. Besides, Vlad King had said they were worried about him, hadn't he? Maybe he was just trying to make Izuku feel better. He'd gotten pretty good at reading people. Vlad King didn't seem like the type of person to lie to him about something as trivial as that. Eventually he did get out of bed, right before any more stalling would have made him tardy. Maybe it was his buried spite for everyone and everything that eventually forced him up. Maybe he had some naive view that things would be the same as they were. It did mean that he didn't have time to make breakfast for himself, but he could make do. He'd done so many times before, nothing would make today any different. Nothing but silence greeted him as he exited his room, his tie haphazardly thrown together around his neck. Not that anything else ever did. It was just a door. He really shouldn't be struggling this much. Just a door to his homeroom. Why was he shaking at the prospect of seeing his classmates again? He was a nobody. He'd probably just walk in and sit down, and no one would notice him. It was as simple as that, wasn't it? Yeah. It would be fine. He opened the door. 20 pairs of eyes landed on him immediately. Izuku practically wilted underneath the shocked stares of his classmates, timidly waving his one good arm. Hi. Midoriya. He couldn't pick out who it was who said his name first, but it didn't really matter considering just about everyone joined in. And also rushed over to him. Shiozaki was the first to reach him, and she looked like she was going to collapse in relief as her eyes met his. Thank the Lord! She cried, clasping her hands together in prayer as a small light descended on her from somewhere. My prayers were not in vain. Yo! Tsuburaba interrupted, throwing his arms out wide. Midoriya-kun. What the heck, man? Why didn't you tell me your quirk was so manly? Tetsutetsu roared, you're like a noodlier version of Crimson Riot. People were starting to crowd around him. He let out a tiny eep as everybody got as close as they could to him and continued to try and talk over each other to speak. It wasn't a pleasant experience. You didn't have to heal me. Pony squeaked out in English, if you hurt yourself when you use your quirk. Dude! Fukudashi shouted, the confused face, emoticon popping up in his speech bubble, why's your arm in a cast? Shouldn't recovery girl have? Enough. That single word was enough to get the entire class to immediately shut up and back up, with everybody parting for Vlad King to make his way over to Izuku, who knew he looked like he wasn't having a good time. I understand that all of you are relieved to see your friend, he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, but please, give Midoriya-kun some time to breathe, yes? The last thing he needs right now is 19 faces shouting in his ears, yes? A chorus of mumbles rang out through the room. Yes, Kan-sensei. Izuku let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding in, only to freeze up once again as everyone's eyes remained locked on him. I am glad you're all okay. Tokage rolled her eyes. Dude, you're the one who got hurt. And the one who apparently went around making sure he was the only one hurt, too. Shishida nodded sternly in agreement. To think Midoriya possessed such a noble spirit behind such a plain demeanor. Looks truly are deceiving. Was that an insult? Away snorted as he asked the question, and Shishida turned pale at the accusation. Why I would never, he balked, causing Kaibara and Rin to laugh at their large classmate. Tetsutetsu clapped him on the back, causing him to wince and nearly stumble at the force. You're so manly. Teach me your ways. Hey, metalhead. Hananuki started, pulling him back from a groaning Izuku. Are you too dumb to realize he's still injured? Tetsutetsu blinked as Hananuki grabbed his face and pointed it in the direction of his left arm and the cast that covered it. He'd had to make some modifications to his sleeve to get his uniform on. Oh. That's odd, Yanagi said quietly. Why didn't recovery girl heal you? Izuku shrugged his good arm lamely. We don't know why, but both of our quirks have their own distinct kinds of healing factors, and for some reason they don't, play well with each other, he explained quickly. I heal at an accelerated rate compared to a normal person, but not by much, and my body rejects recovery girl's quirk. He looked down at the ground forlornly, his mood ruined once again. It's not going to be healed in a week, at any rate. Izuku didn't bother meeting any of his classmates' eyes at that revelation, but if he did he would have seen surprise, grief, and guilt flash across just about all of them. Fukudashi made a hissing noise. Ouch, man, he said, once he realized nobody else was going to say anything, that blows. Yeah. Izuku mumbled. Bondo flicked Fukudashi in the arm. Real nice, he whispered. What was I supposed to say? Fukudashi hissed back, SCKS to be you? They weren't as quiet as they thought. Izuku hesitated, it's okay. There's nothing I can do about it. If anything, people just felt worse after he said that. Tsunatori's eyes widened. Ooh! She shouted, causing several glances to be thrown her way. I know. Let's write Izuku's cast. Komori pet her head at the American. What? Do you mean sign? Tsunatori nodded fervently. Yeah. That. When my friends got hurt in America we all signed their casts. She hurried over to Izuku, eyes sparkling and a marker in her hand as she smiled brightly at him. Can I? What was with Tsunatori and violating his personal space? He didn't mind that much, but she made him blush like an idiot every time she did it. Okay? Yes. Tsunatori hooped as she grabbed Izuku's hand and pulled it out in front of her, scribbling on the plaster that encased his injured arm. After a moment she let go, and Izuku's face lit up on the redness. There you go. Just like with her number in his phone contacts, she had written Pony in big, bold letters across his cast, the purple of the marker contrasted pretty hard against the alabaster white, he thought. She had also drawn a crude depiction of a horse beneath her name. "Hey!" Fukudashi said, already grabbing his own marker from his bag. "Me next." "I call next." Someone else yelled. All of a sudden, Izuku had 18 people scrambling to sign his cast and put their own little unique mark on his accessory. It wasn't anything he was familiar with in any capacity, but it was nice. He'd never expected that he'd have an entire class of people who wanted to interact with him, and let him know they were concerned with his well-being. The feeling was so nice, he was able to ignore the one person in the room who wasn't trying to interact with him. It was a little difficult, though, considering Kendu's indecipherable stare never strayed from him. Lunch was weird. After what was a relatively normal first half of the day where each PRD was started by one of his teachers talking about how happy they were to see him again, he had thought the strange events were over. And then half the class decided to sit with him, Fukudashi, and Bondo at their usual table. He was crammed between Tetsu and Bondo, who was thankfully cognizant enough to leave Izuku some breathing room for his broken arm, with Shishida and Hananuki also on their side of the table. Fukudashi, Nirenjiki, Tokage, Yui, and Pony sat on the other side, and the other half of their class was seated at the closest table they could find. It was quite the contrast from the first handful of weeks of school, to say the least. He didn't say much, but he didn't have to. At least 2 conversations were going on at any given point, and usually there were more. Right now he was simply nodding along to Fukudashi's story about what had happened yesterday while he was recovering. "I'm telling ya," he rambled on, "I've never seen Kendu so angry. When someone from Class 1A started mouthing off about how lucky we were to get attacked by villains, she ripped them a new one." Yui nodded in agreement. "1ASCKS. Hell yeah they do." Tetsu slammed his fist on the table at the mention of their sister class. "Total pricks, the lot of them. That general education kid was a self-centered deech, too." Izuku blinked. "Who?" "Some purple-haired kid that decided to come and talk smack to us about how he missed out on the hero course," Fukudashi explained casually, said how if non-hero course kids do well enough in the sports festival, they can take our spots. Well then. Wasn't that ominous? As Fukudashi noticed the uncomfortable look on his face, the boy quickly tried to backtrack. "But, I'm sure he's all bark and no bite." "Indeed," Shishida added, "he had quite the unsavory attitude. If he truly intends to become a hero, he has a lot of work to do." Izuku hoped they were right. He couldn't imagine Vlad King and his other teachers dropping him out from the hero course if some general education kid did a good job in the sports festival, considering just why he couldn't participate and all, but it didn't do anything to soothe his frayed nerves. He felt like had a right to fear the worst at this point. Tetsu opened his mouth to add something, likely about how manly Izuku was. He still didn't understand what his classmate was talking about, but was cut off as a shadow fell over the group. "Excuse me, Midoriya-kun," Kendu said politely, her face betraying no hints as to what she was feeling. "Can I talk to you?" Izuku blinked as he stared up at the redhead. She looked even taller while he was sitting down. Sure," he responded. "What do you need?" She fidgeted in place for a second as some of the others at the table also turned to look at her. "In private," she clarified. "Oh." Bondo slid out of the booth to allow Izuku to get up before he responded, but it wasn't as if he was going to say no. Even if the thought of talking to one of his female classmates was almost enough to turn him into a tomato, he didn't think she would do anything malicious. He hurried to follow her out into the hallway where there were no prying ears, and soon enough it was just Izuku and Kendu awkwardly staring at each other. "So, he muttered, breaking the silence and their eye contact as he looked anywhere but at Kendu. What did you want to talk about?" Kendu rubbed the back of her head, also averting her eyes from him. She started, just as stiff as he was. "I just wanted to say thank you. For the USJ. You didn't have to use your quirk on me, you know." Izuku nearly did a double take at her words, but was able to keep a straight face. He realized that if Kendu thought he didn't have to heal her, then that meant nobody had told her about how bad the injury was, something he was actually rather okay with, considering he really didn't know how he'd react if people started thinking they owed him their lives or something. It was also pretty weird hearing someone say, "thank you" to him. Most of the time people ran away screaming after they realized the drawback of his quirk. It freaked people out pretty hard. It's okay." He stumbled over his words once he realized she was still waiting for a response. "It's kind of all that my quirk is good for, so I'm, happy to help." He nearly said instead of "my quirk," but caught himself at the last second. He didn't need his classmates thinking he was any weirder than he was, and he hoped Kendu hadn't noticed the near slip-up. Still, Kendu insisted, "It's not fair that you're forced to miss out on the sports festival because of me." Izuku frantically waved his one good hand out in front of him. Don't blame yourself," he said, surprised. I am the one who chose to use my quirk. It's not your fault. Besides, I probably wouldn't have even done that well in the sports festival, what with my quirk not really being very helpful and not being particularly great at this kind of stuff." Kendo frowned at his words. "You shouldn't put yourself down like that," she said, her voice oddly soft. "You're in the hero course for a reason, Midoriya. You work just as hard as the rest of us, maybe even more. If anybody deserves to get seen by the pros, it's you." Izuku's face erupted in scarlet at her words, brain already sputtering to a halt. She blinked. "Are you okay?" Why yeah, I'm fine," he finally managed to stammer out, still beet red. Thanks for saying that, Kendo-san." She smiled gently at him. "Don't worry about it, Midoriya-kun. You don't have to be so formal, you know. We're friends, aren't we?" Izuku blushed again, looking down at his feet. Sure," he mumbled, rubbing his cast. "Fukudashi tells me to loosen up a lot, too." Kendo giggled at his reaction, before whispering something that sounded suspiciously like, "Pony was right, he does look like a strawberry." He started to wheeze. It took him a minute to calm himself down, and Kendo began to speak again. "Seriously, though, thank you Midoriya," she repeated. "If there's anything I can do for you in the future, don't hesitate to ask." Izuku fidgeted in place for a moment, before offering her a sheepish smile. Got a pen? You can sign my cast, if you want." Kendo smirked, already pulling out a green marker that matched the color of her eyes. "I thought you'd never ask." When Izuku and Kendo returned to their classmates, both in brighter spirits, he immediately realized that something was off. Where did Hananuki-san go?" "Went over to go and pester Kurwaro about something," Tetsu replied casually. "Took all his stuff, too." Kendo looked over to her table, and sure enough, her spot had been taken. "Whatever." She shrugged. "Can I sit here, then?" "Go nuts," Fukudashi said offhandedly, "we're not cops." She rolled her eyes at him but didn't waste any time in sitting down next to Bando, who helpfully pushed Izuku's stuff down the table so that he could just take a seat on the edge of the booth. "Thanks, Bando-san," he said gratefully, with his friend just waving off the words easily. He started picking at his food again, still not fully back to 100 perfect. "So what's up with you guys?" Kendo asked. Tokage shrugged. "Just trying to figure out how Airhead here can actually eat. He says he doesn't like doing it in public, but he has to do it somehow." Fukudashi pouted. "I'm not telling you. It's weird. Or funny," Tokage countered, tapping a finger to her chin in thought. "Parsley. You got a brain on you, how does he eat food without a face?" Izuku looked up in alarm as she called on him, still not used to the parsley nickname Tokage had given him. "Huh?" Tetsu reached over and knocked him on the shoulder. "Yeah," he exclaimed, "you're smart, stupidly smart. Have you figured out how Fukudashi eats? It seems like the kind of question you'd be thinking about." Izuku hesitated, looking towards Fukudashi in a not-so-subtle manner. It was a question he had thought a little bit about, but the answer, in his eyes, was pretty simple. "I mean, maybe?" He didn't sound very convincing. Tokage snapped her fingers. "Aha!" she shouted triumphantly, "you do know how he does it. Spill the beans." "What?" Fukudashi gasped. "How could you have figured it out? There's no way." Izuku shrugged lamely beneath the intrigued stares of his classmates. Even the ones who he'd ordinarily imagined to be uninterested by a conversation like this, Kendo, Kodai, and Shishida to name a few, were looking at him, eager to hear his hypothesis. He tried not to wilt beneath their stares. Even if there was no malicious intent behind them, it was still nerve-wracking to be the center of attention so frequently. "Well, I'm pretty sure it's actually kind of simple," Izuku began. "You see, considering the effects of his quirk." A sizzling hand clamped down on his shoulder, stopping the verdette in his tracks as his eyes shrunk to pinpricks. "It is you, Deku," Bakugou snarled. Even without turning around, Izuku knew there was only one person who could have made it to UA that would call him that. "I thought I told you that you better not show your face around here. Did I not make myself clear?" Steam started to rise up from his shoulder as Bakugou burnt through his uniform and seared his skin. He trembled silently, unable to formulate any coherent response even though he knew that would just make him angrier. "What are you doing?" Kendo was on her feet in an instant, and most of the table followed her lead a second later, reaching over Izuku's head and shoving Bakugou away, or trying to, at least. The spiky-haired blonde stumbled back slightly, but was able to keep his balance thanks to the ironclad grip he had on Izuku. "Who the F do you extras think you are?" Bakugou barked, sparks flying out of his free hand. "Get lost. This conversation is between me and Deku." His use of the word extras made some of them pause in confusion, but Bakugou had already turned his back on them, whirling around on Izuku in a fury. "Answer the question, Deku," he snarled, spittle flying into Izuku's face. "I'm gonna kill Y." This time, Kendo did rip him off of Izuku. He sprawled to the floor as Kendo's massive fists reached around Bakugou and yanked him back violently, skillfully pinning his arms against his sides as he struggled in her grip. "I'll ask again," she hissed, "what do you think you're doing to Midoriya? Who the hell do you think you are? You think we're just going to let you assault our friend for no reason?" Bakugou could do nothing but snarl in rage as he struggled to free himself. "Let me go," he demanded. "I'll kill you too. Do you losers know who I am? A total FING psychopath, by the looks of it." Tokage sneered at Bakugou. "We've already told you that we don't, how about you enlighten us?" Every single word that dripped from her mouth was laced with sarcasm, something that clearly went over Bakugou's head. He briefly stopped squirming. "I'm Bakugou Katsuki," he stated, quite arrogant for someone who was completely immobile. "I'm the next #1 hero." Tetsu scoffed, cracking his knuckles. "The only thing you're going to be #1 on is our sheet list, a-hole. If you think you can just walk on over here and attack our friend, you've got another thing coming. Why the hell do you extras give a shit about Deku?" Bakugou spat. "He's a quirkless loser. He probably cheated his way into the hero course." A pause. Everybody stopped to try and process what Bakugou had just said. "You're insane," Kodai said flatly after a moment, voicing everyone's shared opinion. Fukudashi and Tsunatori were at Izuku's side by now, gently trying to help him to his feet, although that effort was made to be a bit of a challenge with how his shoulder felt like it was melting. But he grit his teeth and pulled himself up anyway. He'd been through worse, a lot, of it at Bakugou's hand, and he wasn't about to let this be the thing to stop him. "Why is this uncouth barbarian calling you Deku, Midoriya-san?" Shishida asked. "Surely he has a history with you, yet he does not know your name?" Izuku winced. He hated that name, and it didn't help that one of his classmates was now saying it. "It's a shortened version of Dekunabu," he mumbled, "means useless." "Because you are," Bakugou shouted, before hurling even more swears at Kendo and the rest of the table. Everyone in the lunchroom was staring by now. The other half of 1B was making their way across the room towards them, and a good portion of who Izuku assumed was 1A was doing the same. Great. Now a fight was getting ready to break out. Izuku wished he could just crawl underneath the nearest table and... What is going on here? The cafeteria fell silent as everybody stared at All Might. Even Bakugou went slack-jawed at seeing his idol, although it definitely wasn't his first time thanks to the hero course. The same could not be said for the rest of the student body. All Might's smile was as wide as ever, but there was a sharp edge to it, like he was daring somebody, no, anybody, to step out of line. "Well? I'd like an explanation." This time, the question was definitely directed towards them. Bakugou sputtered and stopped like a broken record, but the first person to break their silence was Kendo. "This lunatic," she began slowly, not even blinking underneath All Might's intense stare, though she did momentarily lower her head in recognition and respect for the hero, "just came over in the middle of lunch and started assaulting Midoriya. We were just here, minding our own business eating, when he stomped over and started threatening him and the rest of us for standing up for our classmate." "That's bullshit," Bakugou shouted back, practically on instinct, but it was far too late to defend himself. All Might's eyes flickered over towards Izuku, lingering on his singed shoulder before he nodded. The hero's eyes hardened. "I see. Is this true, young Bakugou?" Bakugou raised his head in defiance, an act that was once again very unimpressive due to the fact that Kendo still had her hands wrapped around him tightly. "Absolutely not. Dishonesty will do nothing to help your case. Understand?" Bakugou wilted like a dead flower as All Might cut him off harshly. It's because..." All Might stopped smiling. "I do not care about your reasons. Assaulting another classmate is unacceptable, especially considering what we discussed following your first hero course lesson. I would appreciate it if you released him, young Kendo." She didn't need to be told twice. Bakugou fell on his butt as Kendo practically threw him on the floor, and although All Might didn't comment, he did shoot her a pointed look as Bakugou picked himself up from the ground. "Follow me." His tone left no room for argument. "I believe the two of us are due for a meeting with Principal Nizu." The explosive teen stared at All Might in shock. But now, All Might was content to wait for Bakugou to start moving. It clearly took longer than he liked, but eventually Izuku's former friend began to trudge out of the cafeteria, the #1 hero standing so closely behind him that Bakugou was forced to walk in his shadow. "I would appreciate it if one of you would take young Midoriya to the nurse's office." All Might spoke without looking back, making quite a few of his classmates jump in surprise. "I will see all of you later in class." And just like that, they were gone, as if it hadn't even happened. He could almost accept he had hallucinated the past few minutes, except for the fact that Izuku's shoulder still felt like someone had taken a red-hot poker and let it rest on his shoulder for a few minutes. The cafeteria slowly returned to a normal volume, with most of the hushed whispers no doubt being about him and Bakugou. As for his class, Bondo of all people was the first to start moving again. "Well," he said, sweeping his backpack up in one wide motion, "should we take Midoriya to the nurse's office?" Izuku grimaced, and not just from the pain. He interrupted, "Why you guys don't have to do that, Fukudashi interrupted him with a flat stare. "You are not about to say that you don't need to see Recovery Girl, dude?" His face flushed. "Oh, of course not." Izuku was quick to shake his head at the incredulous stares he was receiving. "But, you guys don't have to escort me or anything. I can walk there on my own." He reached for his backpack, trying to hide the way his shoulder felt like it was being torn open, but Bondo was quicker. Just like he had done for himself a few moments ago, the gentle giant picked up Izuku's bookbag and hoisted it up onto his shoulder. "It's no problem, Midoriya-kun," he rumbled, "allow us to assist you." "Yeah," Tsunatori said quickly, latching onto his good arm and pulling it over her shoulders to help him walk. "Let's get you to the nurse." Izuku's face exploded in pink as she placed one hand around his waist and kept the other on his arm, completely and utterly out of his depth. Why you don't have to." Tsunatori shook her head, making sure not to slap him in the face with one of her horns. "Too late." She giggled at the mortified expression on his face. "Lead the way, Bondo." He looked to his classmates for help, but all of them were either too busy laughing at his predicament and his red face, or offering him a cheesy thumbs up. 3 guesses as to which one of them was doing that. He was sure Fukudashi would be giving him a really stupid smirk if he could. "As you wish, Tsunatori-san," Bondo said, taking the initiative and beginning the trek towards Recovery Girl's office. Izuku was pretty sure that if it wasn't for Tsunatori practically carrying him, he wouldn't have made it one step away from the table. Midnight stood silently against the lectern at the front of the classroom, with Izuku and his 19 other students forced to endure the awkwardness. "Well?" she repeated, "anybody have an answer for me?" Nothing. Izuku was pretty sure most of his classmates were pointedly avoiding her stern look. She tapped her foot impatiently against the tile floor, arms crossed. "Okay," their teacher relented, "fine. 4. Anyone know what that number means?" Izuku shook his head slowly. Did he miss something on the day he was out? Judging by the way Midnight's stare didn't relent, it seemed that none of the 20 held the answer she was looking for. She kept up the tense atmosphere for a few more minutes, before finally sighing and slouching over, clearly disappointed. "It's the number of students out of the 20 of you that didn't fail our first exam." Well then. That wasn't very good. He heard Kurwaro gulp loudly in front of him, and similar, or worse, reactions followed from everybody else. "I suppose congratulations are in order to Shiozaki, Shishida, and Kendo, for not outright failing," Midnight announced, with each student named letting out a small sigh of relief, and his teacher locked eyes with Izuku, smirking slightly. "Oh. To the one student who actually got an A. Good job, Midoriya." Izuku's face flushed, in no small part due to being called out like that, but also because Fukudashi and Tsunatori started clapping. Tsunatori was likely just doing it to be polite, but Fukudashi was definitely just trying to make him embarrassed. It worked way too well. Midnight cleared her throat after a moment, quickly making any excess noise cease. "Anyways," she continued, "I was considering allowing for makeup exams, thinking the issue was on my end, but since some of you were clearly able to understand and evaluate the material we've been working on for the past few weeks, I thought better." The class groaned as a whole, with the obvious exception of the 4 who had passed, but Midnight cracked her whip and immediately silenced the room. "My decision is final," she said sternly, crossing her arms over her chest. In that moment she looked nothing like the flirty, teasing DMNTRX hero. No, she looked every bit like the disappointed teacher she was. "Art history might seem like a joke to you, but trust me. It's not. I'm very disappointed in all of you." Ouch. That one hurt. Izuku's eyes slipped down towards his desk, the tension in the room palpable enough to make him curl in on himself even when it wasn't directed towards him that much. He felt like he had done something wrong. Maybe if he hadn't brought so much attention to himself with his grade, she would have gone lighter on the rest of the class? Maybe he just got lucky, and it was his fault everyone else was in hot water with their teacher? But what could he even say? What could he even do, aside from intentionally? Wait. That might work. If he had to sabotage himself to make sure the rest of his free classmates got by, then it was a small price to pay. And one he'd gladly pay. Especially considering the fact that if things kept up this way, they might suddenly realize the same thing he did. Begin. At the sound of Vlad King's voice, Fukudashi and Kaibara rushed forward, ready to engage each other in yet another close-quarters matchup, and it was instantly clear who had the advantage. Yowza! Fukudashi's speech bubble flung backwards as Kaibara's gyrating arm got dangerously close, an exclamation point appearing in the white space as he hurriedly made some space between them. Ease up on the drills, dude. No can do, he said calmly, pressing the advantage with ease. I already lost once, and getting beat by Tokage was pretty DMN humiliating. Hey! The aforementioned girl shouted from the stands. What's that supposed to mean? You should be honored to get your butt hooped by someone as amazing as me. There were similar cheers and jeers as the spar continued, with a few of Izuku's classmates losing themselves to the excitement of the match. Vlad King seemed content to let them talk, clearly sensing that after all the events of the past few days, most of his students just needed a chance to let out some energy. Of course, Izuku didn't get to participate. The class was focused on one-on-one spars, and even if Vlad King was dumb enough to let Izuku fight for some reason, none of his classmates looked eager to beat up a defenseless twig in a cast, especially considering a good 3/4 of the class were taller than him. Thank God for Shota. If it weren't for him, he'd be the shortest boy in class by a mile. And he already had enough to be embarrassed about. Fukudashi's yelps and shouts dragged Izuku out of his thoughts, quickly bringing his mind back towards the fight, or rather, the beatdown, unfolding in front of his eyes. Bondo nudged him slightly with his shoulder. What do you think, Midoriya-kun? Does Fukudashi-san have a path to victory anymore? Tetsu, who was only a few feet away, still nursing a wicked blow from one of Tsudanori's horns, snorted. Fat chance. Dude sounds like a cat in a meat grinder. Real nice, Testu. Away snorted, though he was clearly disgusted by the comparison. But yeah, Fukudashi's F.ed. Izuku chewed on his lip slowly, mind running a mile a minute as his classmates discussed the spar. Did he want to say something, or? Bondo noticed his hesitation. Something wrong? He asked calmly. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, Midoriya-kun. I think Fukudashi-san can still win, Izuku mumbled, quickly grabbing the attention of his classmates. In fact, he's probably the favorite right now. As if on cue, Fukudashi let out an ear-splitting screech, right before Kaibara would have gotten him pinned. The boy immediately recoiled, clutching his ears as he groaned in agony at the noise. What the hell, man? Even Vlad King looked displeased by the sound. Their homeroom teacher grimaced, but made no attempt to end the fight. Fukudashi immediately capitalized on the breathing room his shout had offered him, taking a deep breath and letting out one of his newest creations. Thwump! A noise that was strangely similar to the sound of falling snow formed from Fukudashi's mouth, the kanji expanding and shifting to blanket both Kaibara and the arena they were both in. The boy's cool, serious demeanor cracked instantly, the weight of the kanji immediately pinning him to the ground. What the? He tried to push himself up, even gyrating his limbs for extra inertia, but to no avail. Fukudashi cackled victoriously. SCKS to be you, man. Looks like you lost after all. Their teacher kept his neutral gaze up for a moment, before letting his eyes fall onto, do you yield, Kaibara? After one more desperate attempt to drag himself up, the boy sighed. Yeah. Woohoo! Fukudashi cheered in celebration, throwing his arms up in a victory pose as though he'd won the sports festival and not just beaten one of his classmates in a friendly spar. I'm untouchable, baby. Kamakiri rolled his eyes at the dramatic display. You lost in one hit to Shota, he reminded, causing the party to come to a rapid end. And me. And Kendo. And, I get it. He huffed, an sad face emoticon appearing as his face for a moment as the kanji pinning Kaibara disappeared. Why don't you let people have nice things, huh? You're always so grumpy, take a chill pill. If Vlad King wasn't present, there was a 100% chance that Kamakiri would have flipped him off. As it was, he settled for a glare that would have put his friend in the ground if looks could kill. Impressive match, both of you, their teacher praised. Kaibara-kun, you're definitely getting quicker. Fukudashi-kun, you get similar marks. May I ask where that, new attack came from? Fukudashi bobbed his speech bubble. Midoriya showed me. Izuku froze. Wait, I didn't. Yes you did. Fukudashi protested, seemingly determined to give him credit. You were the one who came up with the idea of not needing a full onomatopoeia for all my attacks. And the one who came up with the idea of making up onomatopoeia, too. Great. Now everyone's eyes were on him again. Izuku wilted like a decaying flower. They were only suggestions, he mumbled. I didn't know if any of them would work, or if you'd even listen. His friend, if he could even call him that after this betrayal, just did his best attempt at blowing a raspberry at him. Who do you think I am? Fukudashi cried dramatically, I always listen. I'm a great listener. I'm the best listener in all of Japan, or, well, I would be, if I had ears. Tokai's head floated over to him with renewed interest, a gleam in her eyes as she smirked. Is that so, Parsley? She asked teasingly, giving secret tips to some of our classmates? Whatever happened to honor among thieves? What? Izuku stammered, I am not a thief? And it was only some minor observations. Tetsu snorted. Hardly. Fukudashi loses that fight 10 out of 10 times normally. He was running around like a headless chicken before he did that scream thing. Izuku's face was hotter than it ever had been before. He'd probably give the surface of the sun a run for its money. I just like quirks, the verdette whispered softly, already fearing their response, it's just a hobby. Of all the responses he could have received to that statement, one of his classmates literally bowing his head at Izuku was just about the most unexpected thing he could have seen coming. Midoriya-san, Shishida began, you truly embody what we strive to be as heroes. Not only are you strong and caring, but you are also wise beyond your years, and always encouraging us to be the best versions of ourselves. Oh God, he was going to die of embarrassment. It's really not like that. He pleaded, really? I just asked Fukudashi-san some questions, and he did the rest. He was ignored. And humble, Shishida whispered in awe. Midoriya-san, I have a request. Please, offer me insight on my own quirk shortcomings, so that I may be as ready as I can be for the sports festival. I humbly beseech you for guidance. Hey, wait a minute. Fukudashi protested, there's no way I'm letting you just waltz right in and take advantage of what was going to be my secret weapon, Midoriya's giant brain. I want help. Tsunatori added, Prussian blue eyes big and bright as she smiled at him. Please. With Japanese and quirk. And all of a sudden, the floodgates were open. If Parsley could make Fukudashi win, imagine what he could do for me? Oh goodness, is it truly fair to request aid from Midoriya-san, when he's already done so much for our class? I mean, twin impact can't be improved that much, right? Izuku was so, completely, utterly, totally, overwhelmed. But in a good way. And he kind of liked it. He'd do his best to help his classmates, in any way he could. And if that meant they wanted to see what he could come up with about their quirks with his, interest in analysis, then so be it. It was nice to be liked. Izuku stared at his phone with a growing mix of shock and horror. He reached out towards it hesitantly, only to flinch back as it vibrated once more. This had been going on for nearly half an hour. He still didn't know why. Or how. His phone buzzed again. And again. And again. Now, it wasn't as if Izuku didn't get texts. Fukudashi and Bondo texted him sometimes, and while the rapid-fire pace of the messages definitely fit Fukudashi's MO, he couldn't have been just texting himself for the last half hour, and he scheduled his tutoring sessions with Tsunatori through them as well. This went beyond any of that, though. Maybe he was added to a random group? Maybe he was getting scam texts, that had happened before. It took a lot longer than it should have to gather his courage and pick up his phone. Izuku knew he was kinda pathetic, but this was something he was going to have to take to the grave. Nevertheless, he was training to be a hero, so something had to be done. Izuku took a deep breath, steeled his will. And picked up the phone. Paperclip, I'm in. Real steel, me too. Shishida, I think it is a good idea to partake in class bonding activities, but I cannot deny that I am unsure about whether or not it is smart to do so at such an important time. The sports festival is less than a week away, shouldn't we use the time for training? Lean Mean and Green, respectfully, you fell off. Live a little. We trained all of last week and will be training for the rest of this week, too. What's one day off between classmates? Kendo, Setsuna is right, Shishida. It's just a day out together. No one is forced to come out. I just thought it would be a good way to relax and enjoy ourselves, goodness knows we need it after all those pop quizzes ectoplasm was tossing on us all week. Kodai, Lean Mean and Green, is that an I agree, or a I'm staying home, Yui? Kodai, This was not what Izuku expected. Not in his wildest dreams. His class had made a group chat? And included him in it? This was crazy. Unbelievable. Insane. Did they add him by accident? It had to be an accident, right, because this was just not possible. Pony, yay. Let's all go hang together. Love that. Airhead, totally in. A ways, Kaibara and I were already thinking about hanging today anyway. XX_SwordKing_XX, I don't really want to, but I'm not going to skip out like some kind of shut-in when everyone else is going out. Lean Mean and Green, LMFAO Kamakiri, you are the biggest dork every holy sheet. Paperclip, I can't breathe. XX Sword King XX, shut up. I made this account when I was like 8. I'm not changing it because you people are too lame to appreciate it. Scales, Kamakiri, I'm sorry, but they are absolutely going to cook you and you deserve it. Kendo, relax, guys. It's just a name. Anyways, I'm going over everyone's responses and it seems like everyone has confirmed except Midoriya. Does anyone know if he's usually still asleep at this time? Paperclip, nah, he's up disgustingly early in the morning. And asleep at like 10 too, he always misses me and Bondo's late night gaming sessions. Paperclip at Small Might. Lean Mean and Green, there is no way that is his name, I am sobbing. Lean Mean and Green at Small Might. Pony at Small Might. Paperclip at Small Might. Izuku was going to die. Of embarrassment. And shame. Why was Fukudashi outing his sleep schedule like that? And why did they want to hear from him? And why was he even in this group chat in the first place? Small Might, I'm here. That was good. Letting them know he saw the messages while not sounding too embarrassed. Or ashamed. Or confused. Izuku was very confused. Kendo, oh, hey Midoriya. Kendo, we were just planning a little class outing to the mall today. Everyone else has already agreed to come. You interested? His class was inviting him out. To hang out with them. And no one had a problem with it. Fear seized up in his chest despite knowing full well that it was irrational for it to be there. They were his friends. But he didn't have friends before. They were nice to him. But no one had ever been nice to him before. They wanted him to hang out with them. Small Might, that sounds fun, I'll be there. Kendo, great. We'll see you there. The shopping mall that lent Kyoshi Ward its claim to fame was just as imposing in front of him as it was in the pictures on his phone. Izuku couldn't help but gulp at the large, imposing entrance, designed to seem inviting for visitors to come in and open their wallets, yet somehow just intimidating him. Maybe they were going to kick him out. He didn't exactly have a lot of pocket change. Greetings, Midoriya-san. Izuku was not proud of the fact that he nearly jumped out of his skin at the sound of Shiozaki's soft, unassuming voice. Ah. You hi, Shiozaki-san, he greeted, dipping his head politely to the thorny-haired girl. I suppose you're here to see everyone else, too. She nodded softly, her gaze softening as he raised a hand to still his heart. Apologies for startling you, Shiozaki said gently, her tone slightly apologetic, but yes. Kendo-san informed me of the meeting, and I thought it would perhaps be a nice outing with the class. He nodded shyly in agreement. Yeah, it would have felt pretty weird if I was the only one who didn't show up. I am happy I was invited, though. And don't worry about startling me, that's, pretty easy to do, huh? Shiozaki nodded at his attempt to wave off her apologies, the slight upturn of her lips giving Izuku no insight into whether she thought his reaction was amusing or pathetic. Hopefully not pathetic. He could live with amusing, but pathetic would just make him feel even more lame. It didn't take long for the pair to arrive in the atrium of the mall, where Kendo had quickly spotted them and eagerly waved over. Hey, guys. She greeted warmly, smiling bright enough that Izuku almost had to look away. Good to see you. You're right on time. Parsley. My man. Tokage called out to him playfully, floating an arm over to wrap around his shoulder, something that made him squeak in shock, but not fright this time, and Ibra-chan, too. We got the whole gang of greenies here. Izuku blinked slowly at her words, once he recovered from the fact that a girl's arm was wrapped around his neck, that was. I don't see Kamakiri-san. PSSH. Tokage waved her hand dismissively. That sourpuss got all grumpy on us when I said hi, and stomped off to go look at some antique swords or something. Lame. Hananuki, who had been busy conversing with Shishida and Nirenjiki, scoffed as he approached them. It's your fault he left, dude. You wouldn't stop making fun of his username. The girl just sighed dramatically. But it's so funny. I mean, like the X's on each side? The underscores? That's hysterical. And uncouth. Shishida reprimanded, Kamakiri did nothing to earn your mockery. You were just, how do you say it? She was rage-baiting him, Hananuki said flatly, and it worked way too well. Kurwaro and Komori went to try and get him over to the arcade to go blow off some steam. Tokage just shrugged. You win some, you lose some. Shiozaki shook her head. How rude. Kamakiri-san did nothing to earn such ire. It's just messing around. She whined, whatever. I'll go apologize, blurg. Tokage's arm finally slipped from Izuku's shoulders, reattaching to the rest of her body as she slunk down the mall towards where Kamakiri had presumably gone. Shiozaki just shook her head. How uncouth. I dunno if I'd call her all that, Hananuki said drily. Tokage just gets her kicks from this way too easily. Not like she's cursing anyone out. Before Shiozaki could reply, Komori came up to pull her fellow plant enjoyer, and Kendo, for that matter, away. They didn't seem too nonplussed about it, however, and merely waved Izuku and Hananuki farewell as the girls were dragged to the nearest gardening store. Anyways, Hananuki remarked, watching the pair leave the outer rim of the assembled students, "How's it going, Midoriya?" "Good," Izuku replied slowly. Is Kamakiri-san going to be alright?" The taller teen nodded. "Yeah, he just takes stuff too seriously sometimes, not that Tokage needs to be all annoying. It's whatever." "Alright, Midoriya-kun. There you are." Izuku's head perked up at the sound of Fukudashi's voice, his speech bubble-headed friend hustling to where he and Hananuki were standing. "Geez, this place is huge. I've been running around looking for everyone for, like, forever. Where's everyone else?" Hananuki shrugged. "Went off on their own. Bondo was with Rin and Yanagi earlier, if you wanted to go find him. I'm still looking for Tsuburaba as is, so." "Oh. My. Gosh. You are so cuuute." Izuku had no time to react before a pair of hands were suddenly on his shoulders, spinning him around and leaving him face to face with the longest eyelashes he had ever seen. They belonged to a girl. She was a little bit shorter than Izuku, with long blonde hair and her aforementioned extremely long black eyelashes. She fluttered them as she looked up at him, her gaze utterly adoring. His brain exploded. There was nothing left in his head anymore. Do I know why you? Izuku stammered, completely at a loss for words as he tried to recover from the one shot she just hit him with. Behind him, he could vaguely make out the sound of Fukudashi's speech bubble exploding in shock. The girl giggled and leaned in closer, her eyelashes coming dangerously close to poking his eyes out. "No, but I know you. Or at least that you're my kohai," she said playfully, her hand sliding from his shoulders to his own digits. "I'd recognize that t-shirt anywhere. After all, I made the prototypes before UA started selling them out of the school store." "You go to UA?" Hananuki asked. "What class are you?" "I wasn't talking to you." All the friendliness and cutesy attitude evaporated in less than a second. Her gaze hardened as she looked down on Fukusadi and Hananuki despite being shorter than them. The two of them blinked in surprise, but as quickly as that abrasiveness appeared it was gone. Coincidentally, it left right as her eyes landed back on Izuku. "As I was saying," she purred sweetly, "I'm the one who designed that line of shirts. I'm Kenranzaki Bibamai, Class 3G, but you can call me anytime, cutie." He was going to die. This girl was going to make his head explode. And just because she was flirting with him. Izuku stammered out, completely lost for words. Izuku. Midoriya. Izuku, Kenranzaki repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Cute. Like you. I like cute things. And cute boys. And cute-sounding boys. You check all those boxes. So, be my boyfriend?" "Oh, wait, no. I should start simpler. What class are you in? And how'd you break your arm?" Izuku's mouth opened and closed slowly, but no words came out. He gaped like a fish out of water, but his senpai seemed either completely oblivious or completely uncaring to the way he was currently drowning in her hands. His classmates were equally stunned, flabbergasted, even, but Hananuki was eventually able to recover his wits enough to speak for him. "We're in 1B, the hero course," he said slowly, eyes flickering between Izuku and their senpai. "Midoriya-kun's arm got broken during the villain attack last week." Kenranzaki's face scrunched up at the words, whether it was because Hananuki's voice was somehow really irritating to her or because of the mention of the USJ, Izuku would never know. "Humph," she huffed, reluctantly letting go of Izuku, though not without a longing look. "Well, I'm glad you're all alright, you especially, Izu-chan. Heroism is dangerous. I'd much rather stick to support, thank you very much." She fiddled around in her pocket for a moment, before pulling out a pen and notepad. Her tongue stuck out from her lips as her eyes narrowed in concentration, writing down something before marking it with a kiss and putting it in Izuku's collar. "I won't take up more of your time with your, Kenranzaki squinted at Hananuki and a strangely silent Fukudashi, classmates. "Here's my number, Izu-chan. Don't leave me waiting." And with that, she skipped away with a happy hum. Completely unaware of how she just killed Izuku. Did that just happen? Hananuki asked, similarly stunned. He had no response. Fukudashi, however? Midoriya. What the hell? You can't keep getting away with this. His friend stomped over to him, taking the spot in front of him that Kenranzaki had once held. Fukudashi's hands gripped his shoulders tightly, before suddenly starting to shake him like crazy. Dude, how are you so good at randomly picking up girls? He nearly shouted, appearing in his speech bubble, first Tsunatori, and now that literal goddess? Is it part of your quirk? Do blondes prefer green hair? Teach me your ways. I have no idea, Izuku stammered out, voice shaking just like the rest of him. PP please stop SSH shaking me. If Fukudashi could scowl, he probably would have been. As it was, he just released Izuku's shoulders with a dramatic huff. There's no way, man, he grumbled, can't friggin' believe it. Midoriya pulling all the maidens. I am not, pulling anyone, he defended weakly. I mean, I've never even seen that girl before, and I'm just tutoring Tsunatori-san. You know that. I kinda gotta agree with Fukudashi here, Hananuki interrupted, you're definitely pulling mad girls. I mean, you didn't even have to look at that chick and she was suddenly all over you. And she's our senpai? You really hit the jackpot. I don't even know anything about her, he whispered weakly, trailing off awkwardly, and she could just be making stuff up about going to UA, or it could be a prank. Fukudashi just shook his head in disbelief. Bro, he muttered slowly, shaking his speech bubble before suddenly perking up. Well, if you're not interested in her, why don't you give her number to me? Fukudashi-san? Hey, she was hot. After that whole ordeal, it was nice to do something that they had actually come to the mall for. Shopping. Izuku wasn't actually buying anything himself, however, he was just pulled along by whoever felt like letting him tag along. Hey Pony-chan, does this top look like too mushroom? Case in point, right now. Tsunatori shook her head enthusiastically. No. She exclaimed, shaking her head and causing her blonde curls to bounce, very nice. Not too gooey. Tsunatori-san, Izuku said hesitantly in English as their classmate snorted, Keikamori-san was making a mushroom pun. She was asking if it was too much, not too, gooeyed. Tsunatori's eyes widened comically at Izuku's words, a faint hint of pink rising to her cheeks. Oh! She breathed out in surprise, thanks, Midoriya-chan. She then turned to Komori, her eyes narrowing with a soft huff, ignoring the way pink exploded across Izuku's cheeks at being called Midoriya-chan. Kanoko-chan, not awesome. You forget I'm bad at Japanese. No puns. Izuku still wasn't sure how he ended up clothes shopping with them. Fukudashi had gone chasing after Kenranzaki when Izuku hesitated on giving him her number, and Hananuki had just snorted before walking off to go find Shishida again. That left poor old him wandering aimlessly, trying to stifle the feeling of being abandoned again before Tsunatori had scooped him up to third wheel with the girls. Still better than being alone. Sorry, the shorter girl snorted, before her lips pursed softly. For real though, is it too much? You think he'll like it? Izuku tilted his head in confusion. He? Tsunatori snickered as she gave Izuku a conspiratorial look. Kanoko-chan totally has the hots for Kurwaro. She wants to try and be sneaky in getting his attention, but it's just so obvious, isn't it? He stared dumbly at her. Bwah. Hey. Komori protested, dropping the top back onto the clothes rack to stomp over to the pair. What are you telling him, Pony-chan? Huh? The blonde just giggled. Oh, nothing. Not one thing. Her head tilted to the side as she watched Izuku's reaction. I think I break Midoriya-chan. Izuku shook his head slowly. I'm okay, he mumbled shyly, feeling heat creep up his neck as both of their attention squared onto him. I'm just, surprised, I guess. I didn't really think any of us would, like each other? The girl stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Midoriya-chan, Pony said slowly, you're, like, the dumbest genius I know. Huh? I dunno what Pony just said to you, Komori said plainly, but, like, you're too pure for this world if you think like that. Midoriya-kun. We're in high school. Even if we're training to be heroes, we're still teenagers. She leaned in close to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. You didn't hear this from me, she murmured, but Yui and Setsuna? Thirstiest people I've ever met. Izuku's face exploded in red. Why you, he stammered, WESS shouldn't TT talk about our C classmates like that. Komori shrugged unapologetically. It's just how it is, she said, I mean, I'm sure the guys are the same way. It's not like it's not normal. And UA isn't Shiketsu, we're allowed to date. He swallowed thickly. How had the conversation even come to this? Tsunatori's eyes widened in realization. Oh, she breathed out, elbowing Komori, Kanoko-chan. It's because Midoriya-chan has a love. He thought he had no chance at dating. That's why he blushing. What? If Izuku's face was just red before, it was the shade of a nuclear meltdown now. That's not true. At all. Komori's eyes narrowed as he tried to defend himself. I dunno, she murmured, seemingly more to herself than either him or Tsunatori. Midoriya-kun kinda blushes like this for everything. Remember math class on Friday? Reiko-chan asked him if he had a spare pencil, and when she said thanks he got so red ectoplasm thought he was choking. Tsunatori giggled at the reminder. Hee, Midoriya-chan is like a baby bunny. But for seriously, Kanoko-chan has the attraction to Kurwaro. Badly. You should help her. Huh? Izuku was going to get whiplash from all the sudden topic shifts, but he was grateful that they were no longer asking about his lack of a love life. Help? Shut up, pony. Komori hissed, cheeks burning in embarrassment. I don't have the attraction badly. He's just nice. And cute. And misunderstood. And how could Midoriya even help? He didn't know what attraction was until 30 seconds ago. The blonde just shook her head. He can be your featherman. Be friends with Kurwaro and ask him questions about if he likes you. It's smart. Absolutely not. There you three are. The conversation was brought to a halt as Kendo walked into the shop, eyes narrowing suspiciously as she eyed the blushes on his and Komori's face. What are you two doing with? Never mind, I don't want to know. She shook her head quickly, sighing in a mix of bemusement and fondness. I was looking all over for you guys, you know. We were all gonna go hit the arcade together as a class, split some pizzas, have some fun together. Tsunatori's ears perked up instantly at the mention of food, all previous topics forgotten in an instant. Pizza? Yes please. Komori looked ready to protest, but her stomach rumbled the moment she opened her mouth, much to her chagrin. Fine. But only if you tell me what you think of this top. She pulled out the same shirt again. Kendo just gave her a knowing look. I'm sure Kurwaro will think it's gorgeous, she said amusedly, turning towards the exit as Komori began to sputter once more. Now come on. The arcade awaits. The sharp change from the warm colors of the mall to the almost garish neon of the arcade was pretty jarring for Izuku. The silence of the main area to the pounding electro-swing music was another major shift. Neither of those were what really bothered him, though. That was more the fact that the place was almost shoulder to shoulder packed with people. He liked being around his classmates. He didn't like being around a bunch of strangers who would probably think he was a freak if they knew anything about him. Kendo led them through the crowd like a shepherd guiding her flock of lost lambs. Or maybe horses, considering Pony was one of the three she was leading away. Were there horse shepherds? Wasn't that what cowboys did, too? Or was that? Izuku shook his head rapidly. He really needed to get a handle on his brain sometimes. But he sure was glad that Kendo was their leader. It just felt right. She knew how to take charge, how to befriend all of 1B, and how to just treat people right. He was still wondering what part of him made him qualified to be her vice representative, but that was neither here nor there. Here we are, guys. A small cheer erupted as Kendo burst through the hordes of arcade goers to the dining tables, where the rest of 1B was eagerly awaiting her return. Took you long enough. Tokage said, nudging Kodai's shoulder conspiratorially. What d'ya think, Yui? Told you Pony and Kanoko kidnapped Parsley. Get over here, Midoriya-kun. Fukudashi urged, patting the spot between himself and Bando. We saved you a seat. So sit down and let us finally start to eat. Kendo made us wait until everyone was here before we could start, and I'm starving. Bando huffed softly, his chest rumbling in amusement. You were the one making a big deal about keeping it secret how you eat, Fukudashi-san, he said. I'd expect you to be relieved. Shut up. Too hungry to care. Tetsu snorted as Fukudashi began to do unspeakable things to the pizza, though he was hardly free of guilt himself. 3 slices of pizza stacked on top of each other that smeared all over his face when he tried to take a bite. Izuku and Bando at least acted like they were normal. 1 slice of pizza at a time, taking human bites as their friends turned into feral hogs. Nairenjiki walked by a few moments later, his face scrunching up in disgust as he watched. Gross, he said plainly, before turning his attention towards Izuku and Bando. Hey, guys. Yanagi-san was trying to see if anyone wanted to play air hockey with her. I said I was in. Do you two want to play? Bando shrugged, his broad shoulders shifting as he stood. Sure, that sounds fun, he agreed, his head slowly tilting towards Izuku. Would you like to come, Izuku? Or? His gaze flitted towards Fukudashi and Tetsu, both in their own little world. Izuku stood up without a second thought. Oh okay. Nairenjiki nodded, still trying his best to ignore the carnage going on beside him. Great, let's go. The two of them followed the shorter boy towards a smaller area of the arcade, where the music was a little quieter and the crowds were a little less major. There were no bright, flashy games spewing tickets out here, just some tabletops that were mostly left alone. Yanagi stood at one, her eyes flashing with some sort of pleasantries at the sight of them approaching. Greetings, Bando-san, Midoriya-san, she said softly, a small smile on her lips. Thank you for agreeing to play with us. She stepped back towards the air hockey table, one mallet flying into her open hand. I haven't had friends to play this game in quite some time, she confessed, though I'd like to believe I still retain my edge. Nairenjiki found her side a moment later, picking up his own mallet as Bondo and Izuku stood at the opposite end of the table. You guys ready to lose? He called casually. Yeah, Izuku mumbled. Bondo gave him an incredulous look. You're supposed to say, bring it on, Midoriya-kun. His cheeks heated up at the call-out. I've never played this game before, though. I'll try my best, but... Do or do not, Yanagi called faintly, there is no try. And you need not worry about winning, or offering your best showing, Midoriya-san, I am merely grateful for your participation despite your injury. She smiled at him, and Izuku couldn't help the warmth blossoming in his stomach. And no problem, he said shyly, ducking his head. He sure was lucky his broken arm was his left hand, aka his non-dominant one. This would have been a lot worse had he been trying to do this with a bad arm, too. Everyone ready? Nairenjiki called, then go. The air puck hit the table. It was anarchy. Bondo reached forward to grab the puck with his mallet, but Yanagi was too quick. She pulled it back onto her and Nairenjiki's side quickly, with the two of them quickly passing between each other before the shorter boy made a quick shot at the goal that Izuku was just barely able to block. Nice one, Bondo grunted approvingly, leaning forward over the table as Izuku passed him the puck. He took his own straight shot on goal, only for it to get expertly deflected by Yanagi and slip right past Izuku for the first point of the game. Oops, he muttered sheepishly. Nairenjiki grinned. Nice one, Yanagi. Thank you. Her tone was polite as ever, but there was no hiding the soft curve of the silver-haired girl's lips at her score. It's okay, Izuku reassured Bondo quickly, we'll get them next time. They did not, in fact, get them next time. The score at the end of the game was 7-1, and it was only that close because the game ended at 7 points. Had it gone on any longer, Yanagi would have been able to start scoring with her eyes closed. Pity claps arose for Izuku and Bondo as they stepped back from the table, Yanagi's skill having drawn a small crowd of their classmates. Yeesh, talk about overkill, Fukudashi muttered, loud enough for both of them to hear. I swear, these two just can't function without ACK. Kendo dusted her hands off after chopping Fukudashi on the back of the head, giving the slightly dejected pair sympathetic looks. Good effort, guys, she said earnestly, smiling at them as Fukudashi groaned in pain, something that caused everyone around him to snicker. You did really well, considering just how good Reiko-chan is at air hockey. Setsuna mouthed the word karma in Fukudashi's direction before nodding, blowing a raspberry towards the side of the table where Yanagi still stood. Yeah, our first girls outing together was a total, look how good Ghosty is at, like, everything show, she grumbled good-naturedly, at least when I have nothing else going for me, I'll always have my perfect personality and charming good looks to fall back on. Yeah, right, Kamakiri scoffed, clearly still miffed about earlier, though no longer actively angry, perfect personality, my. Kendo clapped her hands together, bringing a quick end to the jawing on the sidelines. That's enough of that, she said, giving both teens a smile that promised trouble if they didn't behave. Anywho, who's next? We gotta give Reiko-chan and Nairenjiki-kun what for. Who's with me? Me. Tetsu roared immediately, leaping into action to stand at the table. I love air hockey. Bring it on. I'll prove that I'm the best in the class at this. Nairenjiki just sweat-dropped, staring flatly at the metal head across from him. Whatever you say, Tetsu-kun. Yanagi's eyes shined with amusement. I hope you are as good as you are confident. I would enjoy another partner to spar with. Kids, Kendo shook her head at the display, a fond smile on her lips as she took Izuku's place at the table. We'll win for you, Midoriya-kun. Right? Tetsu nodded eagerly. Right. Let's do this. He just ducked his head. Oh okay, Izuku whispered, butterflies blooming in his stomach as the game began anew. Everything was so nice now. He hoped this never ended.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.